IB Nation, welcome to the Irish Breakdown podcast. This is the Recruiting Hour here on a Monday, coming to you live after an exciting week of Notre Dame action. Obviously, Notre Dame fell short this past weekend, 17-14 on the final play, well, almost final play of the game to the Iowa State Buckeyes. But it was a massive recruiting weekend and a lot of dividends that were paid. So we want to talk a lot about some of the players that were obviously on campus. Notre Dame also got 3 new commits, 2 during the visit in Daniel Anderson and CJ May. Also received a commitment yesterday on Monday from Joseph Reed, all 2025 recruits. So we're going to break that down. We're going to give you a little bit of a recap from this past weekend from a recruiting perspective. A lot of guys, I think there were upwards of 40 players that were on campus, 40 recruits in the 2024, 2025, and 2026 class. And then we'll also dive into a little bit of a mailbag. I've already been storing a bunch of mailbag questions on the back end. So if anybody wants to throw in a mailbag question at any time, throw an MB in the chat, throw your question in, mailbag, make sure that it is distinguished that way. Make it a lot easier on me, obviously doing a solo show today. I see people, some people are admiring the microphone. I hope everyone enjoys it. I hope the audio quality is fantastic. If you want to give me a, yeah, you sound great in the chat, would be a really appreciated thing. But want to get all into this, guys. Before we start, just hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast, all that good stuff. You all know the drill at this point. Let's talk some commits in the 2025 recruiting class that were established over the weekend and on Monday. So the weekend, this is actually a really interesting couple recruitments here, and ones that I'm really excited to kind of talk about today. Sounds sensational, someone said. I love that, man. Tell that to my wife that it sounds sensational. I really appreciate you all. If you would just want to, actually, she's not on any Twitter or anything. I was going to tell you to add her, but you can add her, unfortunately. But yeah, if you ever see my wife, tell her that I sound sensational. I would love for her to hear that. But thank you so much, man. So everyone, let's get into it. First commitment that happened this weekend happened before the football game, actually. It was about, I think 6 o'clock, 6:15, somewhere in that ballpark, and we had received microphone. I was reading the chat, my bad. We had received word via Twitter that Mr. Daniel Anderson, who is a 2025 running back out of Bryant High School in the state of Arkansas, had officially committed to the University of Notre Dame. Obviously, that took some people by surprise, but if you would have heard I did a show that wasn't on YouTube, but it was on Megaphone, Spotify, everywhere you get your podcast platform. I did a little bit of a preview of the weekend. I broke it up into offensively and defensively for the recruits that you need to know. And I talked about Daniel Anderson. The reason I talked about him so much in that preview, outside of him just being on campus, is because we had received word earlier in the week before he even visited that he had silently committed to the University of Notre Dame. So we knew that he was going to commit at some point in the near future, probably during the game. The question at that point was just, when would it happen? Not if it was going to happen. Daniel Anderson was all Irish at that point. It has been a really interesting recruitment, and I'm going to break it down a little bit how we typically do on a commit show. We're going to talk about how it went down. We're going to talk about the class impact. I'm, of course, going to give my opinion on Daniel Anderson as a football player. I like him, by the way. Just a little bit of a heads up there. And then what's next? What's the next step in running back recruiting for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish? We're going to hit on all that here. So first and foremost, the backstory to how Daniel Anderson ended up being a Notre Dame commit. This is actually a fun one because you all know, and if you follow recruiting, and even if you don't follow recruiting that well, and I know, Ryan, the ADHD has hit already a couple times here, man. I swear it has. But if you follow recruiting, you know that the majority of the next class, and I'm talking about 2025 recruits for the most part today, they're all, for the most part, offered on the Pot of Gold offer extravaganza that happens on St. Patrick's Day every year. You're going to see most of the players that end up in the class that are going to be offered at that event. Now, obviously, that's not 100%, right? There's players that come under the radar slowly, guys that you need to kind of make sure that the fit makes sense. There's guys that explode as juniors and then explode again as seniors. So that's an exception. It's not the rule. But Daniel Anderson was a player that was not offered on St. Patrick's Day of this year. Daniel Anderson was a player that had come to the Irish Invasion during this offseason. A player that wasn't really on Notre Dame's radar too much other than let's see in person and see what's up type of situation. Because for people that follow Bryant High School in the state of Arkansas is one of the powers in the state. They've won 5 straight state championships and they put out a good amount of talents. If you remember this 2024 cycle a little bit earlier in the process, they were recruiting TJ Lindsay, who was a very talented defensive lineman that was at Bryant High School as well, but now is down at IMG Academy. Well, Daniel Anderson goes to the same high school as what TJ Lindsay did. And so, but the reason that he wasn't overly high on recruiting services early on, or recruiting services weren't high on him, I should say, was because he split a lot of carries as a sophomore. He ran for almost 900 yards, but he did so on like 80 something carries. He averaged like 11 yards per carry, also averaged 27 yards per reception. So he was a big play player for Bryant High School as a sophomore. Junior year, he's played a couple games, but he's actually dealing with a little bit of a foot injury right now. So he's been a little bit limited as far as the production wise, because he was expected to have a big season as a junior, but that's been put on hold slightly. But he came to the Irish Invasion this offseason. Notre Dame saw him in person. They were incredibly impressed. So much so that they extended an offer to him. And we saw that a lot this offseason. I mean, there's a lot of players on the board for Notre Dame in general. I mean, there's literally 2 guys that we're talking about today in Daniel Anderson and Joseph Reif that camped at Notre Dame this offseason and ended up impressing the staff enough to get offers. Also, guys like Rowan Byrne were in that situation. Michael Roski, Matty Augustine, Ethan Long. There were several players on the 2025 board for Notre Dame that weren't or partly on the radar before they camped, but after they camped is when things really escalated from there. They really kind of took off. And that was the situation with Daniel Anderson. He came for the Irish Invasion, impressed, was one of the top players at the event. Notre Dame extended an offer. And over the next few months, Notre Dame was kind of doing their due diligence with this, right? There's one thing to have an offer from Notre Dame, and there's another thing for them to be a guy that they push for immediately. And Notre Dame really liked Daniel Anderson, but obviously with Justin Thurman already in the class, Notre Dame is thinking about like, let's be make sure we're intentional with this one and get the running back that we really want to be the second running back in the 2025 class. Notre Dame saw Daniel Anderson his first couple games of the junior year, and they were incredibly impressed by what they saw before he suffered a little bit of a foot injury. And this quickly became that Daniel Anderson was a player that Notre Dame was going to push for. Over the last few months, Daniel Anderson has been on several game day visits, or a couple game day visits, not Notre Dame, several campus visits, also not to Notre Dame. And during that time, because I had a recent interview with Daniel that I believe is live at Notre Dame, is live on irishbreakdown.com. Daniel Anderson basically went on those visits because from the start, it was about Notre Dame. He loved the school. He loved the program. He loved the coaches. They were his guys. And he has steadily pulled in more offers over the last few months. It's been a great story. It really is. Because he's a guy that has pretty much earned everything he's gotten at this point. Almost every offer that has been extended to Daniel Anderson is because he camped at the school this offseason, impressed, and was extended an offer that way. So he goes on these visits over the last few months, and quickly he's trying to find that feeling, right, that he got from Notre Dame to see if there's other possibilities out there. And quite honestly, there's just nobody that was in that league with Notre Dame. I mean, it quickly became very apparent that Notre Dame was the school for Daniel Anderson. So he didn't come to South Bend this time around because he's been to South Bend now 3 times, including this past weekend. So he was in South Bend for the camp for the Irish Invasion. He went again as a recruit a couple of months ago, and then he returned, obviously, for the Ohio State visit for his 3rd time. But he did not come to Ohio State to finalize things. He came to Ohio State to celebrate things, if that makes sense. He knew he was committing to the University of Notre Dame. Like I said earlier in the week, we had gotten word that he had already made his silent commitments. Everything was going to happen from there on out. And that's how we got here, man. A guy that was not on the radar, camped, impressed, and has steadily just been grinded away. And Notre Dame has loved what they have seen of him throughout this process. So he became a guy that they wanted, a guy that they want to pair with Justin Thurman in the 2025 recruiting class at running back. So class impact is second running back in the class. You are now done at the running back position. And I think for me, it's a very interesting pairing. And I'll get into my opinion on him as a player, speaking of Daniel. But what each of these players brings to the table, I think, is an impressive ability to, I think, mesh well together because they're very different football players. Talking about Justin Thurman, talking about Daniel Anderson. Justin Thurman is a speedster. He's a kid that has clocked between 4.3 and 4.4 in the 40-yard dash, high 30s in the vertical. He's a track kid. He runs incredibly fast. He's a home run type of kid. Daniel Anderson is not that same type of running back. He's more of your Logan Diggs-esque runner of I in the NFL draft space, I call them one-gear runners, and it's no disrespect, but they get up to top speed quickly and they maintain that foot speed, but they don't really have that second, third gear to really take the top off consistently. They're more of single doubles and maybe an occasional triple hitter if we're using an analogy to baseball. They're more explosive plays, but not home run plays. But Daniel Anderson runs with really good pad level. He's physical. He's got kind of that slipperiness as a running back to kind of churn out extra yardage. He's a slasher type, which I really like. And he also catches the ball really well. Like I said, he didn't catch a ton of passes as a junior, but averaged 27 yards, really good in the screen game, especially halfback screen game. So there's a lot to like about Daniel Anderson. And a couple interesting comps that I just saw in here. Someone said reminds me of Matt Forte and Arian Foster. Arian Foster is a really interesting one. Arian obviously ended up being a lot bigger of a back. He was about 220, 225 pounds at Tennessee and then with the Houston Texans. But I don't hate the comp because I actually think Daniel Anderson is going to be about 215 pounds when all is said and done. He's got a really wiry frame already at 195 pounds. I think that he is going to be able to put on a very suitable amount of weight to get there. So class impact is Notre Dame is now done in the 2025 recruiting class at running back. Daniel Anderson, I think, gives him a really nice compliment. And if there's a mailbag question about Daniel, I think Brandon Plensner already asked a little bit about Daniel in the chat. And we'll be able to talk more about him, which I think would be a very interesting conversation. And if you guys want at boards.irishbreakdown.com, I'm going to be doing a couple of like film reviews. That's just for the subscribers, for the premium message board members. And I'll be able to really go a lot more in depth on it and give you guys some clips, some analysis, what I like, what improvement needs to be had, like all that type of stuff. But I really think that for me, like he's just a very good all-around back. Is there any elite traits that Daniel Anderson has? I wouldn't necessarily say that that is the fact. He is just slippery, tough runner, solid explosiveness, good hands. He just kind of checks a lot of boxes. I don't think he's ever going to be a guy that's going to wow you, right? Like Jeremiah Love wows you because he's got some elite level traits. I wouldn't say Daniel Anderson has that, but I think that one thing that we always need to remember with these types of conversations is that Daniel Anderson's a junior in high school. He still has another year and a half to play football, to continue to get better and better and better before he ultimately ends up in South Bend. But 2025 recruiting at running back is done. So what's next? The next step? Well, Tila McCullough can now look to 2026 players if he wants, right? Like, well, not if he wants. He's going to now start to comb the 2026 recruiting landscape because that's all he has to take care of at this point. Similar to Logan Diggs, I would say, Jay. Yes, I think he's similar-ish to Logan Diggs. Kind of just a good all-around player, or maybe not elite at any one thing, but like a good all-around player, which I think matters, right? Like that matters for me. It really does. You need a guy that's kind of that all-purpose weapon because Audric Estime is great, but Audric Estime is also a player that having compliments to is a great thing because having a guy that maybe is a little bit more of a receiving threat, maybe a guy that's a little bit more of an outside oriented runner to pair with an Audric Estime, that's where you become a dangerous football team, right? And I'm just dreaming right now, guys, of in a couple years, you are going to have Jeremiah Love, Keedron Young, Aeneas Williams, and then getting Justin Thurman and Daniel Anderson to come to town as well. That is an embarrassment of riches. Losing Audric Estime for a lot of teams would be potentially after the season. For losing him potentially after the season would be a death sentence. It's like losing a really good running back who's going to play in the NFL. That's a tough part, right? That's tough. But for Notre Dame, you have now recruited the running back position so well that it's just kind of like, what's next, right? Like, let's just pick things up and keep moving forward because we have recruited this position as well as anyone. And for anyone, and again, we can have an open conversation about this, guys, because I think it's important, right? I paid to tell my opinion on things, right? To report things and tell my opinion on things. I believe what I believe. And I will respect everyone else's opinion on a football player. But in the end, my eyes are the eyes that I trust the most. And the great thing about that is that your eyes are also the ones that you should trust the most, right? So if you watch Daniel Anderson's film, you love him, awesome. If you watch his film, you like him, but you're not like sold on him, that's cool. If you watch his film and you're just not a huge fan, that's okay. We're all allowed to have that difference of opinion. But the great thing about a forum like this, a chat like this, a community like this, is we can talk about it, right? I like Daniel Anderson. I like him a lot. I think that it is a very good pickup for the University of Notre Dame. And part of why I believe that is, one, I like the film just in general, especially the sophomore film, because junior film has been a little bit limited, obviously, with the foot injury. But the other great thing, and I think the thing that we need to talk about as much as possible, is that sometimes we need to just trust people, right? And for me, Dylan McCullough has earned my trust as a recruiter. Do we remember when Jeremiah Love was initially offered by Notre Dame this past cycle and he was rated as a 3-star recruit? A lot of the stargazers out there would have looked at the time and been like, why is Notre Dame offering a 3-star from St. Louis? Well, here we sit now, 5 games into the season. Is anyone upset that Notre Dame offered Jeremiah Love and he's on this football team? Because I think he has a chance to be the best running back that Notre Dame has had in several years. Like, I think he has that type of upside, right? Dylan McCullough evaluates very well. Is he going to have a miss at times? Sure. Everyone has misses at times. That's the great world of evaluation. But I trust Dylan. I do. Even if he makes an evaluation mistake, I expect him to coach that player up and get the most out of him, which is the great thing. So that's Daniel Anderson, running back, Bryan High School in the state of Arkansas. Got Notre Dame's weekend kicked off very fast this past weekend, committing only a couple hours before, actually about an hour and a half before Notre Dame's game against Ohio State officially kicked off. So he got the weekend started off incredibly well. I think it's a very good pickup. Notre Dame's recruiting of the running back position continues to be strong moving forward. Fortunately for you all, Daniel Anderson wasn't the only recruit that made his commitment known on Saturday. Notre Dame also received a commitment. This was a little bit after the football game had concluded. They had received a commitment from Highland Home, Alabama High School defensive end, Viper, CJ May, listed at 6'4", 225 pounds. This was a fun one for us, especially because I had actually talked to Brian before the weekend had started. And he kind of had asked me, obviously we knew about Daniel Anderson, but, who are some other players that like should be on commit watch, right? Like guys that maybe if they have a great weekend, they might be able to pop. And I told him CJ May was my surprise guy for being a guy that could pop. And there's a lot of reason for that. A big reason, well, I guess the starting point is that I have known for a long time that CJ May has really liked Notre Dame. He was offered a what he was actually offered during the Pot of Gold offer event. And he's been a player that has now been to Notre Dame twice, but every time you talk to him about Notre Dame, he speaks just volumes about everyone. It's not just one person, right? He talks about he talks about Al Washington, talks about Nick Sebastian, talks about Al Golden, talks about Marcus Freeman. He's talked about all those coaches to me, which tells you when you're hearing from that many coaches, one, that means that the coaches really like you. The other side is that you know that he really likes Notre Dame because he's speaking very well of multiple coaches, which is always a great sign. So I went into this weekend thinking that there was an outside chance that CJ May could commit to Notre Dame. I said it on the message board, I think yesterday or the day before, that I have felt that Notre Dame has been the leader for CJ May for some time now. I just think that there was something that needed to happen to really just kind of push it over the top. And I think the player that pushed it over the top, in my opinion, because I truly believe that Notre Dame would have ended up with CJ May if not for this, but I also think that this pushed over the top. And that's Deuce Knight, quarterback out of Lucedale, Mississippi, George County, who committed to Notre Dame last Monday. Chose Notre Dame over offers from Tennessee, Ole Miss, Alabama, yada, yada, yada. So we are seeing the dividends pay off. And I don't want to go super in depth on this because I'm going to talk about this a little bit in my visit recap from this past weekend during the second part of this podcast. But Deuce Knight, I think, really pushed this one and just kind of made this one move a lot quicker for CJ May. He was not necessarily in commit mode going into the weekend as if he knew that he was going to commit when he got on campus, but he got on campus and everything just started flowing, right? The feelings, the love, the fans, everything around him. He got to experience, talking about CJ, along with the other recruits, he got to experience college game day. He got to walk around campus. He got to give his family on campus. He actually made the drive from Alabama. Said it took 10 and a half hours to get up for the trip. So him and his family drove right up to campus. But leading up to that, Deuce Knight had been talking to CJ a ton about like, hey, bro, we need you. When Deuce Knight was officially committed to the University of Notre Dame, I think that CJ May was on the short list of players that Deuce was pushing for because Deuce and CJ, before that even happened, actually had a really good relationship. They were friends. And that one pushed that one incredibly forward. No problems. You need to chill, man. I'm going to block you for a couple of minutes, sir. I'm going to block you for a couple of minutes. You need to stop. But so Deuce, I think, really kind of pushed this one forward and kind of finished this one out for CJ May. Made the commitment after, obviously, the game had ended. Had the chance to talk to him, and just in love with the place, man. He sees the vision, and he saw the vision before Deuce Knight was in the class. When Deuce Knight came into class, though, I think that really just kind of solidified everything. Notre Dame now has their first defensive end. Well, rephrase, they have their first Viper or boundary end in the class now with CJ May. He projects as a player that is going to be kind of that twitched up Jordan Botelho type of player, a little bit of a more of a stand-up rusher at times, a guy that can drop in the coverage as times as well. Things you need for that spot are flexibility, foot speed, length, and explosiveness. You need those are kind of the physical, that's the physical profile that you need at that position. And CJ May has all that in volumes, folks. So that's how it happens. What it means for this class now is I think we need to talk about, actually, we'll talk about numbers during the what's next section. But for this class, you honestly, you needed more of these Viper types in the class. I keep seeing on the message board everyone saying you need more defensive tackles and interior players. I don't agree necessarily. I think I mean you need more of them in the just sheer volume of the position. But if I watched that Ohio State game on Saturday, my big takeaway was not the interior defensive line wasn't up to snuff because outside of one run by Trayvon Henderson, run defense was really good, and they were asked to hold the point of attack and be physical during that game. And I thought they did that. I think the biggest issues during the course of that game was you can't they could not get home with pressure enough in that football game. They couldn't win enough one-on-one pass rush reps. They couldn't get home with 4. They couldn't do it consistently anyway. And think that you need more of these true outside track explosive pass rushers. And that's what CJ May brings to the table, in my opinion. So that is the big impact in this class is that one, you have your Viper in the class. And we'll talk about the numbers, obviously, of the position and how many we should expect in the 2025 class when all is said and done. I also think there's something to be said about Notre Dame now dipping deep into the South for multiple players. I mean, we're sitting here now, 6 recruits in the 2025 class. You have 1 player from the state of Illinois now, but outside of that, you have a quarterback from Mississippi. You have a defensive end from. Sorry, I'm just reading some of these numbers. Yeah. You have a quarterback from Mississippi. You have a running back now out of the state of Arkansas. You have 2 players out of Florida, a defensive tackle, and a running back out of the state of Florida. And you have a pass rusher out of Alabama. A young man, by the way, is CJ May, who has scholarship offers to schools like Georgia, by the way. So it's a pretty good football player, man. He's a really good football player, which is why Notre Dame obviously had pushed for this one and had been putting in a lot of effort. This was a collaborative effort from the Notre Dame staff looking at a player like a CJ May. My thoughts on him as a football player. And I disagree so much with some of the stuff that's said in the chat, guys. We can get into this later, but Maris Loifau was not the issue on that 60-yard touchdown run. I think, if anything, J.D. Bertrand not remaining patient enough, working inside out, and a missed tackle from Xavier Watts was actually the issue there. You're taught as an outside linebacker, when there's a puller coming at you, you take that puller out. That was his responsibility on that play. He did his responsibility and actually made it have to spill outside. It's not his fault that J.D. Bertrand got caught in the trash because he's a little too antsy, and Xavier Watts missed the tackle in the open field. That was not a Maris Loifau play. I know every time Maris doesn't play a great game, because I thought he was solid, right, in that football game. I didn't think he was good. Like, I'm not saying that Maris Loifau was a star in that football game, but he was not the issue on that play. Was not the issue on that play. So let's just chill out with the throwing the shade. I get it, man. I know you guys are getting me off topic because it's not true. Like, it's just not true. I played the linebacker position, not at the highest of levels like these guys are playing, but you taught as an outside linebacker, when you see a pulling guard or a pulling lineman coming at you, your responsibility is, when you are that player in that situation, to take that player out and then trust the guys around you. He did that. Guys, you're not understanding. Okay, you guys are getting me. You're getting me really fired up. We'll talk about this. Someone asked me about that play specifically for the mailbag. Please, can we talk about that later? Because it is that was not a Maris Loifau thing. That was not a Maris Loifau situation. But we'll talk about it later, man. We'll talk about it. Yeah. That's my point, G baby. I think that was J.D. Bertrand being a little bit too antsy, not playing from enough depth. And I also think that was a missed tackle, obviously, by Xavier Watts in the open field. I do not think that was a Jordan Botelho play. And it was also a really good play by Trayvon Henderson. So we could talk about that though, man. We could talk about that though. Thank you. Thank you for listening to my rant there for a couple seconds. Let's get back to CJ May, who's a really good Viper in the 2025 class, man. Let's get back to him, please. Joe, chill out, man. It's my show. I can do whatever the heck I feel like. All due respect, all right? So CJ May commits to the University of Notre Dame, true Viper in the class 2025. What's next for this class is that you now have 2 defensive end commits in the 2025 class. CJ May is a Viper. You have Joseph Reif that we'll get into next as a strong side defensive end. We believe that this is going to be a bigger defensive line class in general, especially at the edge spot in 2025. So we would anticipate there might be 4 defensive ends in the class. So I would expect Notre Dame to continue to recruit Viper, trying to find that next guy, and then strong side defensive end to try to pair with a Joseph Reeve. Who is next? Who is next at the Viper position? The answer, the truth, not 100% sure. There's a bunch of guys that are on the board that Notre Dame likes. Oh, thank you, Joe. I appreciate it, man. Joe, my apologies. Sometimes it's hard to read tone in a chat. So my deepest apologies if you were trying to help me there. I know I have ADHD. You're trying to get me back on topic. My apologies, sir. Truly. So there's a bunch of really talented Vipers that are on the board in the class. I mean, guys like Justin Hill popped to mind. Bryce Davis popped to mind. There's a lot of really good football players at the Viper position, guys that project as that space end, guys that can work a little bit off ball at times, guys that can play in pass coverage when they need to drop. Who is that next guy remains a question. And I don't have the answer to you. It's a great question. I just saw someone ask, is Christopher Burgess that guy? Notre Dame views Christopher Burgess as a strong side defensive end in the 2025 class. So we'll get to him when we talk about Joseph Reeve. But for Viper, Notre Dame definitely wants to add a second one to the class. There's a lot of guys on the board. Jaden Woods is another guy from Kansas that I think is a really impressive football player as well. So I would anticipate to keep hearing Viper names in the 2025 class. This is not it for the Viper position. This is just a big piece. It's a massive piece because I talked about him a little bit, and I know I'm kind of splicing together 2 different topics here, but I think this one's a massive one, guys. I was looking at the recruiting rankings, and I don't 100% understand what some people are looking at with CJ May from a recruiting ranking perspective. I think 247 Sports is the highest on him, if I remember correctly. He's like the number 171 overall player in the class, which is a good ranking. It's not a bad ranking, right? It's good. But I watched CJ May and I'm like, I don't know what I'm missing here. I think this kid's at least a top 150 football player. He might be a top 100 player right now. He is incredibly explosive, plays violent. I think he's loose. I mean, this is a true Viper type. I think that he's going to weigh probably in the 250 range when all is said and done, because he's about 225, 230 pounds right now. I think, just kind of taking some bad weight off, continuing to put weight on, as is a normal maturation of a defensive lineman in college or a college football player in general. But man, he plays hard, he plays fast, he plays physical. I think this is a guy, again, this is my takeaway from this past Saturday, is Notre Dame was not able to get home winning one-on-one battles on the defensive line. They weren't able to do it. I think CJ May is a kid that can get home. I think he is. He's explosive. He is strong and he's physical. So I think that brings, I think he's a really good athlete at the position as well. Like, I just think that he fits the profile of the Viper. I think he'll end up being a top 100 player when all is said and done by most recruiting platforms, as long as he continues to mature. The difficult part is this high school that he goes to, Highland Home. Man, they are so good. They don't lose very often. He just dominates and he doesn't get a ton of balls. I literally was asking him, I asked him a couple weeks ago, just checking in on him. How's the season going so far? He's like, man, it's a little frustrating, to be honest. He's like, we're winning. So that's all that matters. But no one runs at me. And I'm like, yeah, I get that, man. But I kind of joked with him. I'm just like, I wouldn't run at you either, sir. Personally, if I had a choice, I would also not run at you. But he's a good football player, man. Like him a ton. Big time pickup for Notre Dame. Next step, one more Viper in the 2025 recruiting class, and then you can start looking for the Viper position in 2026. The last commitment that Notre Dame has received over the last couple of days, which we got word about that was going to happen a couple of days ago, happened last night. Joseph Reeve, defensive end out of Elmhurst, Illinois, York High School. So we are back, folks, to some Midwest players here. We had the first 5 recruits in this class to commit to Notre Dame were all Southern kids. The northernmost guy was Daniel Anderson in the state of Arkansas, with where he is at in the state of Arkansas. Otherwise, you had 2 Florida kids, 1 Mississippi player, 1 Alabama player, and 1 Arkansas player. That was your first 5. Oh gosh, man, Salty, I am going. No, it's a computer case, and it's not even my computer case, Salty. You are just killing me, man. Joseph Reeve. Let's get into the backstory on this one because he's another interesting one. Similar to Daniel Anderson, was a player that was not really on the radar. Yeah, I think it's like Riley Reef, Big Jim. I'm pretty sure. Like I'm like 98% positive it's pronounced Reef. So Joseph Reef was also not incredibly on the radar for Notre Dame. Like I think they knew a little bit more about him comparative to Daniel Anderson, for instance. But he was a player that also had camped at Notre Dame this offseason. He camped at Notre Dame, and when he did, he quickly became a guy that Notre Dame really liked a lot. He's 6'5", 235 pounds now, defensive end, being projected as a strong side defensive end or the field end position for Notre Dame. He got onto the radar, and this was one where if Notre Dame wanted, whenever they decided to push, you felt good about Joseph Reef if they chose to really push hard for him. Obviously, they have, and he is now in the class for Notre Dame, the first strong side defensive end in the 2025 class, second defensive end in the class for Notre Dame in the 2025 group. And Joseph Reese, a very interesting football player, but another guy that was on campus this past weekend for Ohio State. He has been obviously multiple times to Notre Dame. I believe he had already been to Notre Dame even before he camped there because he's a Illinois kid and he's very local to the University of Notre Dame. Another player that's confidence level was high on Joseph Reef landing with Notre Dame as long as they pushed. They did. He ended up in the class. There was never a firm timeline on this one for Joseph Reeve. He was always a kid that was, I'll make a decision when it feels right type. And obviously, I think him getting on campus and seeing everything really kind of pushed it over the top. And he had made obviously a decision coming out of the weekend that he wanted to be a part of the Notre Dame program. And here he is. And I really think that the bigger impact here is that this was the first in hopefully a few dominoes in the state of Illinois for the 2025 recruiting class. There are several players that Notre Dame loves in that class, including Taylon Taylor, wide receiver out of Geneva Community, including Christopher Burgess out of Chicago Simeon. And this was the first domino. I think that this is one of the better Chicago Chicago football classes that we have seen recruiting wise in a couple of years. I mean, a few years, honestly. I was actually just talking to Tom Lemming about this last night, and he kind of confirmed that he thought that there was some good players that have come out of Illinois recently, but like this class has as much volume as any class that we've probably seen over the last few years. And Joseph Reif became a player that Notre Dame really liked. So this is how Notre Dame kind of views him, just so we're kind of all on the same page here. Notre Dame views this young man as that kind of lunch pail, physical grinder type that's going to play incredibly hard. And that's what I see on film when you talk about Joseph Reif. So class impact, before I get into fully on my opinion on Joseph Reif, is that he is your first strong side defensive end in the class. He's also kind of the starting point to hopefully making an impact in the state of Illinois and with the local kids in 2025 as well. And you have 3 defensive line recruits in 2025. You have Davion Dixon out of the state of Florida. Obviously, you have CJ May, who we just talked about out of the state of Alabama. And now you have Joseph Reif out of the state of Illinois in the 2025 class. So 3 defensive linemen that are committed to Notre Dame. I would expect 2 strong side ends in the end, 2 Vipers, and then potentially 2 interior defensive linemen. So I think that we can have a 6-man defensive line class in 2025. Now, I have a little bit of mixed feelings on Joseph Reif, and I'll explain why as a player. The things that I really like about Joseph Reif, easy to see some of them. 6'5", good length, not great length, but good length. He's got a big frame too, where he is 235 pounds now, and he is still incredibly skinny. I could see him being 270, 275 when all is said and done. He reminds me of the kid that you would usually get at Iowa. Like they've had defensive ends over the last few years. They just had one that was drafted in the first round. I'm not going to compare this young man to that necessarily, but you think about those just strong physical defensive ends like the Zach Van Valkenburg that they had a couple years ago. They have another kid named Logan Lee who kind of plays between a strong side end and a three tech now. He's kind of what I see about him. I think that he's a defensive end that can play kind of multiple of alignments at times, like 5, 6, 7. Like he can play a little bit of everywhere. I even think that in a three-man front, if when he gets to about 270 pounds, because the great thing about this young man is he also played, his father played at Northwestern, so he comes from a football family. He's not related to Riley Reef. I've gotten that a lot of questions on. I believe that eventually when he gets to about 270 pounds, this is going to be your side defensive end that can kind of rotate in and out. Because I think ideally, guys, like eventually what you would love to do, love to see that if Riley Reef was a player, Riley Reef, I'm going to do that 100 times, by the way. Joseph Reef, I think, is a player that ideally you would love this young man to be a strong side defensive end on base downs, but then eventually move inside on obviously passing situations. I think that's what you would like to be, right? You start to get a little bit more speed on the field, a little bit more finishers inside. That I think is eventually what you would really love to see. And I think Joseph Reef brings that versatility. He's got a big frame. I think he's going to be that kind of massive, strong side defensive end that can move around a little bit, which is great. And he plays his butt off, man. Like that was the first thing that popped to me from just a play style perspective is that kid plays hard. He plays fast. He plays physical. He remains low with low pads. There's a lot to like about Joseph Reef. My concerns are things that I want to see moving forward. I just don't see great twitch or looseness out of this young man. I I see efforts, I see physicality, but that is how the staff views him. The staff views him as kind of like that Kurt Heinisch type of player at the strong side defensive end. Obviously, he's not Kurt Heinisch eventually playing nose tackle, right? But like as far as his play style, his demeanor, being that physical dude that you can just kind of always depend on. And I can see that. I can see that projection. Not a player that I think is ever going to be a star in college, barring a just massive jump as a senior, because he's obviously a junior right now in the 2025 class. But I think he's just a really solid football player. Next step, though, is that you do need to find a strong side defensive end that I believe is a little bit more of a playmaker in the 2025 class. And there's one player that has kind of stood out amongst everyone, and that's Christopher Burgess. Christopher Burgess, who is defensive end out of Chicago Simeon in the state of Illinois, 6'4", 240 plus pounds. That's Notre Dame's guy. That's their guy. They are all on the Christopher Burgess train in the 2025 class. That's what they want. Ideally, this is what you're looking at is Christopher Burgess as the kind of playmaker at strong side defensive end, and then Joseph Reef as that guy that can also rotate in and be that physical, mean demeanor type of kid. So together, I like that pairing. If you're Notre Dame, though, now you need to go out and you need to close Christopher Burgess. That's the player that you want. Christopher's timeline, just for people that are interested about Christopher Burgess, because being an Illinois kid, I'm sure you guys all are. He visited Notre Dame this past weekend for the fourth time, I believe. It was his fourth trip to campus. Really likes Notre Dame a lot. A young man, though, that is being recruited by Alabama, Midwestern Powers, SEC schools. He's being recruited by everyone. The thing for that one, too, is that he is a player that he really likes Notre Dame a lot. His mother's opinion is also going to matter a ton. I had a little bit of an update on Christopher Burgess this yesterday or this morning. I don't know. I've done so many updates. I can't remember, guys. I'm not tooting my own horn either. I literally can't because I'm too old. But he is a player that Notre Dame loves in the 2025 class, and his mom's going to have a big impact on this recruitment. And his mom just made the visit to campus for the first time. The first visit that his mother has taken anywhere with him was to Notre Dame to start things out. So I think that was a great sign. And the mom spoke heavy volumes about how much she really enjoyed the visits and how the fit would make a lot of sense, that type of thing. So You need to close on Christopher Burgess if you're Notre Dame. Joseph Reef is a player that Notre Dame obviously likes a ton. They like him as especially a part of a pairing. So, yeah, that's where we are. So Notre Dame lands a commitment from Joseph Reef, star defensive end in the 2025 class out of York High School in the state of Illinois, Elmhurst, Illinois, to be exact. Guys, before I recap a bunch of other recruits in the 2025 class that were on campus this weekend, I did want to just drop a little bit of a heads up that Notre Dame also did receive a commitment from a long snapper today. A preferred walk-on long snapper, Joseph Vinci, who is out of Westwood, Massachusetts High School. Preferred walk-on. So he's coming to Notre Dame as a young man that will not have a scholarship to start. But all I'll say about this one is that Notre Dame feels incredibly fortunate, and Notre Dame is incredibly fortunate to get Vinci in this class. A lot of people consider this young man maybe the top long snapper in the 2024 recruiting class. So he's going to come to campus before the 2024 season, so this next off season. And I would not be shocked, and this is just my opinion, and a couple people that know a little bit more about long snappers than me, but some believe that Vinci is good enough that he could compete for immediate playing time for the University of Notre Dame. So do not be surprised if this young man comes in and he competes for that job very early on. Again, that's my opinion, but regardless, Notre Dame struck gold here. A young man that's getting him to be a preferred walk-on, because he's a young man that has scholarship offers, legitimately scholarship offers to long snap. Notre Dame is a place, obviously, he wanted to be. He is now committed to the University of Notre Dame. I just would not be shocked if he doesn't have a scholarship offer pretty early on in his Notre Dame career, and I would not be shocked if Vinci was a player that really pushed for playing time early on in his Notre Dame career. So just wanted to give a quick shout out. Notre Dame also received a really nice commitment from a long snapper, the 2024 class, which is always fun. Always fun. But that's going to do it for this section of this podcast, guys. We're going to get into a little bit of the recruiting roundup from this past weekend, talk about some of the other key visitors on campus and just kind of how things went. Make sure before we get there, though, if you could just hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast, make sure that you are hitting that notification bell at the bottom of the screen, because I see some people asking, I might as well hit on it now. Some people are asking, when is Upon Further Review, which we do every week, Brian Driscoll and Vince D'Addario do every single week, just kind of putting the bow on what we saw against Ohio State. And that will be tonight, 8 o'clock Eastern time. So make sure that you hit that notification bell, though, so that you know when the next show will come up. I'll be back, obviously, with Brian Driscoll as well tomorrow at 1 o'clock Eastern time, as we start now previewing their big game against Duke coming up next week as they travel down to Durham, North Carolina. But hit that notification bell. Make sure that you get all the updated information. Also go to boards.irishbreakdown.com for any and all insights, intel into Notre Dame recruiting and Notre Dame team for the rest of the 2023 season. All right, folks, let's get into some players that I'm sure everyone's very much anticipating how visits went this past weekend. I obviously hit on visits went very well for at least 3 players, as Notre Dame received 3 commitments, obviously from Daniel Anderson, CJ May, and Joseph Reef. But they were not the only ones that were on campus. I wanted to start us off just kind of hitting on a few of the key players that were on campus and why it matters so much. I'm also going to hit in mailbag next after that. So if you all want to just throw in some questions and be in front of it, would make a lot easier for me to decipher. So let's start off. I think that a great way to start here was, of course, you get the big commitments from Daniel Anderson and CJ May during the visit. It was great. I think another player that I think Notre Dame I would say that they really moved the needle with this weekend. A player that Notre Dame came into the weekend actually in really good position for, surprisingly, was David Williams, who is a cornerback 2025 out of Buford High School in the state of Georgia. So this was actually Devin's second time to campus. He got to campus a little bit later than what he was hopefully anticipating. He got in, I think he said like an hour or two before the game officially kicked off. So he wasn't able to see like college game day or any of that type of stuff, right? But he still had the opportunity, obviously, to get to the game, to see the coaches, talk to Coach Mickens. And I'll say this, guys, if you want to know what the impact that a quarterback can have in a class, look no further than Deuce Knight, who was on campus this weekend. I already talked about it, but he obviously had a big hand in CJ May committing to Notre Dame. You also have seen him on Twitter, I'm sure, tweeting at guys like Taylor, who I'll talk about in this section as well. He has been recruiting his butt off since committing to the University of Notre Dame. Another player that he has been recruiting hard is Devin Williams. Firstly, before I get into the Deuce Knight, Devin Williams relationship, Notre Dame was lucky enough in this football game, even though they didn't win the football game, to turn out a really good cornerback performance. Gosh, man, you guys are just all over the place in the chat. Salty, chill out, man. I'll get there. All right, I'll get there. Chill out, man. Notre Dame received a great performance by Benjamin Morrison in this game, which Brian highlighted on the message board with some stats. They also got a great performance from Cam Hart as well. Notre Dame's outside corners were just fantastic in this game in general. There were some other spots, nickel position, that needed to play a little bit better at moments in the game, but the outside corners were dope in this game. And I spoke to Devin, which I believe that piece will probably be up on irishbreakdown.com sometime soon. But Devin Williams had basically said, man, like Benjamin Morrison and Cam Hart had both really impressed him, but he thought that maybe Devin Williams had said that he thought that Benjamin Morrison was probably the best cornerback in college football. That was kind of what he said. Because they obviously had a good performance against Marvin Harrison Jr. They had some good performance against the outside receivers in general. The only guy that really killed him in the passing game consistently was Emeka Egbuka, who was working from the slot a ton as well. But seeing that impact that a cornerback can have, because he spent a little bit portion of the day talking to, before the game, he had a chance to talk to Mike Mickens and talk to him just about, what how he's doing, expectations for the game, that type of deal. And Mike Mickens told him, like, we're ready to go. And the cornerback position was very much ready to go for Mike Mickens at outside corner. And I think that made a tremendous impact on him. We talk about the getting to campus stuff as far as being around the coaches, seeing the campus, digging the student life, that type of thing. But at some point, it needs to actualize on the field as far as how good you're going to be, right? Your future. And cornerback position was really good at Notre Dame in 2022. So it shouldn't be a surprise that Benjamin Morrison's a stud. It shouldn't be a surprise that Cam Hart is also very good when healthy. But Devin Williams, I think, seeing it with his eyes was big time for him. I think that really kind of moved the needle. And then also, talked about this to start already, Deuce Knight is recruiting Devin Williams very hard. They've already been texting. He is pushing for that young man to hopefully be a part of the 2025 class. The impacts that a quarterback can have in a recruiting class. You talked about what CJ Carr was able to do in 2024, immediately getting commitments from Cam Williams, Jack Larson in the class, and then signing. Signing day is not here yet, but getting commitments from what appears to be one of the top offensive classes that Notre Dame has had in several years. I think 2025 has a chance to best it when all is said and done. Because I really think that Deuce Knight only increases your chances with guys like Williams, only increases your chances with guys like Taylor and offensive linemen that want to block for Deuce Knight. Devin Williams is a beneficiary of that attention right now. So he's not going to rush anything. My plan is this offseason to drop a top 10 or top 5 at some point, take officials, and then make a decision. That is the objective for him right now, moving forward. Can things change? Always. Things change all the time. CJ May, I don't think, was a guy that necessarily came into the weekend thinking, I'm going to commit to Notre Dame this weekend. I don't think that's how that happens. So could it always move up a little bit? Sure, it could always move up a little bit. But I really do believe that he will let the process play out a little bit. He still has several visits already planned for the rest of the season. Notre Dame is in this one, though, folks, with a consensus top 100 cornerback
in the 2025 recruiting class. Devin Williams is a star. And this visit, I think, showed the potential of the cornerback position at Notre Dame, showed how much Mike Mickens is changing the fortunes of the cornerback position and has been changing the fortunes of the cornerback position. And it also started to develop relationships that were a little bit deeper than that. So I really think, and we're not talking about firing coaches in this podcast today. So people in the chat that are talking about that, that's not my thing, right? It's not my thing. But I really think Devin Williams is trending in a great direction with Notre Dame. Mark Zachary was also on the visit this past weekend as well. Very talented cornerback out of Ben Davis in Indianapolis, Indiana. So Notre Dame's trending with some really good corners in 2025. I mean, that's not even including still recruiting guys like Dallas Golden, Dorian Brew, Cree Thomas is a guy that Notre Dame would absolutely take, and Notre Dame likes a ton. So cornerback position, the future there is looking very bright, and hopefully Devin Williams will end up being a part of that, but we shall see. My only note on 2024 recruiting that I wanted to hit on real quick here, sir, real quick. Davis Andrews, who is a safety out of American Fork in the state of Utah, 2024 safety, who some consider 2026 because he is expected, unless something changes here, they are expected to be a player. They expected to take a LDS mission and be a 2026 player. Technically, he would be a freshman before the 2026 season. Davis Andrews, though, is a player that Notre Dame loves in this class. Notre Dame already has 3 safeties in the class. You have Bronte Johnson, Indiana kid. You have Tabron Benny Powell, who's having a really nice senior season so far, state of Ohio. And you also have Kennedy Urlacher out of the state of Arizona. So you already have a 3-man class. But Notre Dame, despite having 3 men at safety in the 2024 class, they still want Davis Andrews in this class and to eventually make it to campus probably for the 2026 season. A young man that, if you watch his film, I think he's incredibly underrated, 6'2", 195 pounds. Notre Dame has been in the driver's seat on this one for some time now. Was originally supposed to be back on campus this past offseason for the Blue Gold game. Wasn't able to make the trip, so he went to wait for the Ohio State game. I had reported on this earlier today, but I had gotten verification from his father, Rob Andrews, that one, the visit went fantastic. I don't think it could have went better. And Davis Andrews is finally, he's going to be officially making a college decision on October 2nd. He has set a commitment date for October 2nd. And heading into that visit, we'll talk about it, obviously, previewing it and talking about what's next and all that type of stuff. But Notre Dame's in a great spot for Davis Andrews. I think that they should be looked at as the clear-cut leader, barring something changing. I mean, he's had some other schools that he's been pretty high on at some points, Utah, BYU, which are the traditional Mormon schools, got guys that go on missions all the time. UCLA was also a team that he was talking to for some time as well. Tennessee was another one that had some deep conversations with Davis Andrews. So there's been some good schools on him, but I think Notre Dame has kind of outlasted them and continued to pluck away there. So, Davis Andrews in a very good spot. Notre Dame did a tremendous job on this visit, and now they are expecting there's some good news, hopefully, in a couple weeks when he makes a commitment on October 2nd. I want to talk about continued progress with some recruits, which I think is the best way to talk about this is when you have a recruit who is not necessarily in commit mode. You need to be able to continue momentum, right? To build it and hold it and then withstand other schools, other pitches, negative recruiting, and everything else in between. There are 3 players I kind of wanted to couple into this section because there are 3 players that everyone who watches this show, and hopefully you watch the show, also subscribe to the podcast. But people that watch the show, you should have heard these names a lot. And one was Christopher Burgess, who I just talked about earlier. Defensive end out of Simeon in Chicago, Illinois. 6'4", 240-plus pounds, viewed as a strong side defensive end in Notre Dame's 4-man front. viewed as a top 100 recruit by multiple platforms. This kid has about as much upside as just about any defensive end in the 2025 recruiting class. I mean, if developed properly, I think Christopher Burgess has the upside to be a star on the college level. He has that type of profile, that type of talent, that type of upside. He was on campus again. And like I had mentioned before, his mom came in with him for the first time. First college visit that she had ever been on with Christopher Burgess. And some notes on it. Again, I think Christopher Burgess has been high on Notre Dame for some time now. A player that Notre Dame really, really likes, a player that also really, really likes Notre Dame. And he's a local kid, obviously. And anytime you have a local kid that you really like a Christopher Burgess, you need to keep him at home. Keep him at home. And that's what they intend to do. His mother's going to have a great input into this decision. Got her on campus, and she enjoyed her stay very much. Was very complimentary of the coaches, the vision, the campus. Christopher had joked like she's getting a little old now, so she kind of likes quiet things. So she really liked the Notre Dame campus because it's a little quiet, and that's fine. If that's what it takes to get Christopher Burgess to campus, it'd be a little bit quiet at times. Hey man, I'm good for that, right? So Notre Dame's in a good spot here, guys. They really are. You have to play the long game a little bit because there's going to be other visits to other schools where you are going to have to withstand the pressure. But talking to Christopher and just getting to know him a little bit, I think this is a young man and comes from a family that really values the bigger picture. You know, like there's some players that you talk to them immediately and you're just kind of like, I don't think they get it. And it's not a negative necessarily. It's just that other things are more important to them than maybe just the education, the 4 for 40, that type of stuff. But then you come across kids like Jeremiah Love, like Jaden Greathouse, like Sullivan Absher, like those types of players, where Charles Jagasaw, where it's just like they get it, right? Like they see the bigger picture. Jeremiah Love had many opportunities to go to a lot of different other schools in the SEC, in the Big 12, in Pac 12, everywhere. And some people, they made some pretty strong pitches at him, right? We'll keep it like that. Despite that, Notre Dame was able to withstand and show him the bigger picture, and he loved that bigger picture. That was the picture that was more important to Jeremiah Love than the bells and whistles of recruiting. And I think that Christopher Burgess is cut from a similar cloth. So I really think that Notre Dame has a chance to really trend well in this direction. He's a player that you need to be patient with because the process is not over yet. But Notre Dame is in a good spot with Christopher Burgess as of today. And as I reported on earlier in the show, Notre Dame wants Christopher Burgess in this class. He's a guy that is viewed as a must-get kind of player for him and a player that they're going to push very hard for. So they did a really good job with Christopher Burgess this weekend, as they did with Taylor Taylor, star wide receiver out of Geneva Community. For people that haven't followed that recruitment, his mother, Venus Taylor, is a college softball coach, and she's a wonderful lady, by the way. And she has been taking him everywhere, everywhere that he kind of wants to see. It's great that he has a mother, in my opinion, this is my opinion, that understands the recruiting process a little bit. It's a little bit different, recruiting softball versus recruiting football, but it's still all the same basic principles as far as expectations and what a program can bring to you. So she gives him a valuable perspective. Ultimately, though, I will say this, is that his mother's opinion is very much, his family's opinion is very much valued. But Taylor is going to make the decision for himself when it's all said and done. And I think Notre Dame has put themselves in a really good spot with him. I would say as of today, because right now, they're not in the decision-making mode. They've laid it out. After the season, official visits, we'll sit down and we'll make a decision. And I believe them because, again, his mother's very involved in that recruitment, which is good. So I believe that this was not going to end anytime soon, at least not for several months. But I think right now, early leaders for me, if I had to name them, Notre Dame and Michigan, I think are the two teams that are standing out to me for Taylor. So again, withstand move forward, continue to get that young man on campus. If you do, I think Notre Dame has a very good chance of having Taylor in the class, especially with Deuce Knight. Deuce Knight's already recruiting him heavy, but again, having a quarterback in the class is a very easy sell to getting wide receivers in the class as well. So, yes, good spot with Taylor. I think they continue the momentum this weekend with him, as they did with Cooper Perry, who's a star wide receiver out of Scottsdale, Arizona, Notre Dame prep. 6'2", 190 pounds, wide receiver. Really good player, man. He plays in the slot. He plays out wide. One of the better route runners in the 2025 class that I have personally seen in Cooper Perry. I am going to phrase this like this because this weekend was fantastic for Cooper. He loved the energy around the stadium, getting to know the recruits, spent a lot of time with Deuce Knight himself. Just quite simply on this one is that there's not a set timeline necessarily. I just know that he's not going to rush the decision, Cooper. But Cooper has some family ties to the program. His grandfather, was a student, not a student athlete, but a student at the University of Notre Dame. He grew up loving Notre Dame just in general as a school. And it's a young man that's a top 150 football player in the 2025 class. Like, he's a really good wide receiver. Like, this isn't just necessarily a throw-in type of situation, right? My only question is, because we already know that there's a few wide receivers that Notre Dame likes in this class. Taylor's a priority. They really like Derek Meadows. They really like Jerome Bettis Jr. Is he going to be a player that Notre Dame is going to push for? And will they take 4 wide receivers in the class? That's my questions, right? Because I think if they take 4, I think that you have a good chance of pushing for a Cooper Perry. But I just have questions of what the numbers are going to look like. But ultimately, they're recruiting him hard. So I tend to believe, my opinion, no intel here, I tend to believe that there will be room for Cooper Perry when it ultimately happens, right? When he ultimately makes his decision. But numbers are still something that needs to get figured out a little bit. But regardless, another big weekend for Cooper Perry. His second visit to campus, he's already trying to plan another one back. So Notre Dame's in a really good spot with Scottsdale, Arizona, Notre Dame prep wide receiver Cooper Perry. My last update section that I want to go through here, folks, a little bit of a different type, and then we'll hit the mailbag after that. I want to update a few of the recruits that I think were in a little bit of an interesting spot coming into the weekend for various reasons. We'll just leave it at that. I want to start us off with Michael Roski, who's an offensive lineman out of Watoma, Wisconsin High School. Big kid, 6'7", 280 pounds. If you see pictures of him, he does not look 280 pounds, man. He is a really, really physically put together young man. Like, he looks like a kid that was a tight end a couple years ago and just continued to grow into his body. Like, he's a big, big, big kid. And Notre Dame is a guy that he was very high on coming into this visit. Michael had told me, and I had a report on this, that basically it was Notre Dame and Wisconsin felt like the 2 early favorites for Michael Roski in the 2025 class. He was also a player. There's a it's Roski, really? Oh, okay. Apparently it's Roski. I was told that it was Roski, but okay. Anyway, Wisconsin offensive lineman. Notre Dame, Wisconsin were looked at as the 2 schools that were high on the list for the talented offensive lineman. And coming into this weekend, though, it was very interesting because he was a player that Notre Dame had offered this offseason. So it was a little bit later on the radar than some players. Basically, a great conversation that happened for Michael this weekend was not so much the typical recruiting jargon of like, we love you and we want you. I mean, Notre Dame did say that, right? But there were more to this about, I had put out a little bit of an intel piece on Michael. Basically, in the second game of the season, he had torn in his right knee, his meniscus, and his ACL. So he's out for the rest of the year. And if you see the pictures of him, he's got obviously the brace on. So you saw him on campus, and he talked to me a lot about him, Marcus Freeman, Joe Rudolph had a conversation, like a meeting type of thing, where they talked about the injury. Because we'll see this every year, guys, is that not even just Notre Dame, a school will be high on a player, but then an injury happens, and it's just like the future is just a little bit in question, right? And it's just, will you still take them? Will they come back the same? There's a lot of struggling questions that kind of happen after that. But it sounds like Michael, from my conversation with him, feels really good about the conversation that they had this weekend about them being on the same page and comfortable with where the injury is right now. And I think that this is a really good step to be able to have that type of real conversation with the staff, right? Like to let them know, hey, you know about this injury. I just want to talk about timeline and like what the rehab's going to look like and all that type of stuff. So I anticipate Notre Dame still recruiting this young man very hard. What the offensive line class in 2025 ends up looking like, I have my questions of just for like what it's ultimately going to look like from a combination perspective. I think Notre Dame is going to put together a really good offensive line class in 2025, but there's several combinations that I could technically see. But I think Michael Roski, as someone just corrected me in the chat, getting him to campus and just kind of seeing him firsthand, I think was a big step for the staff. And I think it really did kind of settle his nerves. Because let's be honest, guys, like put yourself in the position there. You're a highly thought of recruit that has offers from pretty much every Midwest school, which we know that that's where offensive linemen come from and are developed the best, in my opinion, anyway. And then you have an injury as a junior where you're just like, dang, that could really hurt my chances as a recruit. So having this type of conversation, I think, was a big thing for a guy like Michael, right? And being able to just kind of lay it all out there and to talk about timelines, I think it's a really great thing for Michael to get to campus and be able to talk. So really instrumental, in my opinion. Two 2025 linebackers I wanted to hit on, two guys that I think Notre Dame is incredibly high on. One is Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, St. Joe's Prep linebacker, Anthony Sacca, who plays safety in high school for St. Joseph's. You'll see him playing a lot of free safety, like middle of the field stuff, but being projected by Notre Dame as a rover potentially in their 2025 class. He's had a fascinating recruitment. I would say right now, Notre Dame, Penn State are the top two schools for Anthony Sacca, in my opinion. One is his father, Tony Sacca, obviously played at Penn State, which there's a lineage there, right? There's a legacy, although that doesn't always matter. Tim Hash, that was funny, man. That was funny. For people that aren't people that are listening, maybe on the podcast platform after the chat, but Tim said yes, that sure sounds great, and it's funny because the mic's called Sure. Dad joke, sorry. So Anthony Sacca, Penn State legacy, obviously that gives him a little bit of a leg in there. But the great thing is that his father has actually given Notre Dame a little bit of momentum there as well, because Tony Sacca played at Penn State with Al Golden, who was a really good tight end at Penn State as well. So Al Golden's had a relationship with Anthony Sacca, and Tony Sacca for that matter, for a long time now, which I think was a great leg in initially. This trip was really cool though, because I'd heard Al Golden's name associated with Anthony every time, consistently, but two people that were talked about more this time than I'd heard in the past, which I thought was interesting, one was Marcus Freeman, which not surprised there. Marcus Freeman talks to everyone. But the other one was, of course, Max Bulla, who's the de facto linebacker coach for Notre Dame as well. This is a priority player, in my opinion, guys. And I think we're starting to see that they are now getting multiple coaches on this one and continuing to really push for this guy. Because this is, in my opinion, a Notre Dame Penn State battle in the end. I think Notre Dame has a chance. And if you see any of the pictures and just the conversation from this past weekend, I did a little bit of a recap with Anthony as well. I think he's very high on Notre Dame, but it is going to be a tough pool. It is. You have to battle it out, right? You have to battle it out. It's a legacy versus an in, but you have to show them that Notre Dame is a better spot for him. So Anthony Sacca, though, I think Notre Dame is in a good spot. They just need to continue to kind of keep plugging away, man. They have that opportunity with a couple good visits. By the way, with how much Wawa iced tea I drink on this podcast, man, they really need to sponsor the podcast. I'm going to have to call someone about that. Christian Jones, linebacker out of Omaha, Nebraska West Side. If Omaha, Nebraska West Side sounds familiar to you all, it's because Teddy Rizak in the 2024 class linebacker is committed to Notre Dame out of West Side. Christian Jones is a 6'3", 215, 220-pound inside linebacker who I feel like he liked Notre Dame coming into the visit, but he had never been to Notre Dame until this visit. This was his first time. So he actually went on the trip with Teddy Rizak. They got there early. They got this. Actually, I'm sorry. They did not get there early. So they actually missed college game day, but they got a chance to experience the whole campus, got a chance to hang out with a bunch of other recruits. Really good first visit for Christian Jones. And this is one of my favorite kids though, because he's like almost like an offensive lineman recruit in the sense of I don't think Christian really cares that much about recruiting from like the media perspective, right? Like getting his name out there and talking about rankings and that type of stuff. He just legitimately is trying to find a good home for himself, ultimately. I think Nebraska's high on his list. I think Notre Dame's high on his list after this weekend, especially. But this is one where his perspective has just been the season, the high school season. I want to win a state championship again because they won it last year in the state of Nebraska. So I think that's been the priority. Recruiting is just something that's kind of happening in the free time right now. So I wouldn't expect this one to be done anytime soon, but I think that Notre Dame is plugging away and continuing to steadily build momentum here. Because you don't have to have all the momentum right now with Christian Jones because he's not going to make a decision tomorrow. You need to just be consistent over the next couple months, and then hopefully you're in a good position when he ultimately makes his commitments. Last guy I want to talk about, just a quick conversation on Noah Grubbs, who is a star quarterback out of the state of Florida. Young man that is already listed at 6'4" and 215 pounds, despite being just a sophomore. So 2026 kid. He's out of Lake Mary High School in the state of Florida. A young man that in 4 games so far has 23 touchdown passes, leads the state of Florida in touchdown passes. Again, guys, he's only a sophomore, and he plays against some really good competition in the state of Florida, by the way. He came to campus with his dad and his private quarterback coach, Balin Trujillo, who's actually one of the better private quarterback coaches in high school football in general, guys that work with high schoolers. Came there with them. He had been offered a scholarship after he camped at Notre Dame this offseason. Guys, this guy's going to be a dude, right? Like he's a completely different type than what you have in 2025 with Deuce Knight. Deuce Knight is much more of the dual threat quarterback. Noah can move in the pocket, but this kid's a pocket passer, man. Really strong arm, really good instinctual passer for his age. I think that he's going to be one of the guys that Notre Dame's pushed for. And that's just kind of my speculation, but they've offered him already, got him on campus a second time. A cool note is that, let me find the exact quote I had on him, but it was really neat to hear about. So when he was on campus, he was there with at one point, he was just hanging out with his quarterback coach on the field before the game. And Coach Freeman and Gino Gaduli both walked up to him. Well, they've been having a conversation with him. Coach Freeman actually walked up to him, and this is a direct quote that I had in a piece about Noah, who said, "I'm very happy and excited you came here. Now let's get you to stay here." It's pretty cool. Cool little note in my opinion. Let's get you to stay here. Really talented kid, man. I am very high on Noah Grubbs in the 2026 class. Somebody asked the other day to talk about 2026 quarterbacks. So here we are, guys. You got me to talk about 2026 quarterbacks. Congratulations. That's Noah Grubbs out of the state of Florida in the 2026 class. Had a really nice first visit to campus for Notre Dame. And yeah, man, I think that's Notre Dame recruiting quarterback position has been night and day over the last couple of years, right? You got Kenny Minchie, CJ Carr, Deuce Knight, and now you're looking at some really good 2026 quarterbacks already. So good place to be. And that's Noah Grubbs, quarterback out of the state of Florida. All right, folks, we're going to get in the mailbag next. Before we do, on the Notre Dame Recruiting Hour, if you can please just hit this like button, subscribe to the podcast, notification bell. Would very much appreciate it. 5-star reviews on any and all of your favorite podcast platforms. It really helps me out a ton too. If you just put in your your review. Ryan Roberts is the greatest football analyst of all time. Like that would be very, very appreciative. I would genuinely thank you for that. You just tell me that you did it, and I'll send a thank you note. I will send a thank you note. I'm old fashioned that way. I'll send a thank you note. Also, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. We'll have a lot more recruiting intel during the rest of the week. I'll have some more updates on just some players that visited this past weekend, as well as some commits that were also on campus as well. So hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast. We're going to get in the mailbag next here on the Irish Breakdown podcast. Folks, got a lot of mailbag questions and only one person to answer them. So let's get through as many as we possibly can and see how we're doing on time. We're in a pretty good spot here. So we had a couple super chats already, it seems. Let me just make sure that wasn't another one that had just popped up there. But y'all are Archer. I don't roast on X, man. I just told the truth on X and people get mad at it. All right. I don't roast anybody on X. Archer Archer. Also, what's your name on Twitter or X? Are you just Archer on Twitter, or you can message me, I guess, if you don't want your name out there. I don't know. I don't know if it's like a secretive thing, but let's get started here, folks. Let's get started. We had a super chat that was from Kevin Bagage. Excuse me if I pronounced that last wrong. He said, I pray that we get another shot at Ryan Day in Ohio State. Amen. I would not be opposed to it, obviously. I'll say this, and I don't want to turn this into like an Ohio State bashing thing. I really don't, because at the end of the day, I believe that more credit needs to go to Ohio State than bashing of Notre Dame in that football game. Because I'm a big believer in, if you win a football game, man, you deserve that credit. And Ohio State won that football game. I give them all the credit in the world for that. I left incredibly disappointed that Notre Dame lost that football game. I remember after that last offensive play, I just kind of sat there and I was just like, dang, man, like that sucked, right? Like it sucks. Notre Dame was close, wasn't able to finish it out. But I'll tell you this, is that the thing that made me angry. Gotcha, Archer. A lot of people lurk, man. I get it. The thing that perturbed me, though, made me very upset. Well, not upset. Upset's not the right word, because then people are going to come in here like, oh, look at this guy crying on the podcast. Like, guys, no one's crying. I'm an adult. Relax. But Ryan Day's little speech after the game was just so ridiculous, in my opinion, man. Like, just so ridiculous, guys. Like, foundationally, some of the things he said in that rant were just like, dude, one, you're going at an 86-year-old man for making some comments. Okay, I guess you have the right to rebuttal if you felt it was disrespectful. Sure. But if you really think that you've had one bad half of football over the last couple years, then you're nearsighted and you don't see the actual issues that are at hand. You just got super huffy and puffy. Coach Holtz didn't say anything that was necessarily even incorrect. It was his opinion, right? It was his opinion. You got upset, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But he just needs to stop, man. Like, just stop, right? Like, you won the football game. That should be enough. Like, you continued your dominance in the Midwest, right? And that's great. So you won the football game. The little spiel after the game that was even worse than actually losing the football game, in my opinion. Like, I'm just sitting there listening to that guy. You can, like, the people that I was with, I literally was just like this. Like, I was like visually upset about Notre Dame losing the football game, right? Like, I had my head down like this. And then he started talking. I'm just like, I got angry because I'm like, you are an idiot. Like, stop talking. You just make everyone upset at you. Like, that guy just needs to stop talking occasionally. He got his team ready. His team won. That's awesome. They're undefeated. They're going to move forward. They're going to be a good team. Right. He just came off as like a crybaby, man. Like, that was just whatever. We're past it at this point. But obviously, Kevin had just said something about Ryan Day, so I was reminded of it. But I do hope that they get another shot at that. Look, Notre Dame, you've put yourself now in a elimination basis every single week. In order for Notre Dame to get where they still ultimately want to go, I think that Notre Dame has to win out from here on out. Are they good enough to do that? I think they are. But, I mean, obviously, you're behind the 8-ball a little bit. I really think that it would be an incredible opportunity if they had that rematch. But ultimately, Kevin, like, I'm just worried about Duke right now, man. Like, I am, because I agree with you. I would love to see him again. But Notre Dame needs to, like, this week is is the make it or break it week of this entire season, in my opinion. Either that one was going to be either this one's going to kill the season for Notre Dame and Notre Dame's not going to be able to recover as well, or Notre Dame's going to look at that game and just be really pissed off and play balls to the wall every single week. Like, I think that there's only two outcomes that comes out of that football game. So I'm just interested to see how they play, however they play coming into Duke. If they come out and they just slaughter Duke, or they just easily just kind of outplay them throughout most of the football game, then I feel okay. I feel okay kind of moving forward, because I still think that they can beat USC. I still think they can beat Clemson. I still think that they can potentially win every football game on the rest of the schedule. But Duke is the make it or break it game for me. And that's the only one that I have my eyes on right now. This has to fuel them. If they're the team that I think they can be, then I think they'll come out against Duke and they'll play hard and they will play physical and they'll play fast and they'll put it on Duke. I truly believe that. But it has to happen, right? If Mark Freeman is the coach that I think he can be, if Notre Dame's team has the leaders that I think they do have on it, I think they'll come out and they'll play hard. And I think they'll play well. I really just want to see what Duke looks like, man. And then, Kevin, like, if it ends with Ohio State in some capacity down the line again, great. So I think you saw on Saturday, Notre Dame has the guys to win that type of football game. But I really think that now this Notre Dame team is going to be, they're going to be judged based upon what happens next, right? Because adversity is always going to hit. There's never been a coach that's never lost a football game, right? Teams lose all the time. What's next? Someone mentioned like 2008 Florida. Like, that's a good comparison. I'm not an Urban Meyer guy, but like, it's a good comparison. They lost a football game and then it fueled them for the rest of the season. We've seen that. We have seen teams just kind of get that eye, right? Like that eye after a loss, and you're just like, okay, it's going to happen again. It's not going to happen again on my watch. So I hope that that's the case for this team. Is it going to be? I have no idea, but I sure hope. But Kevin, regardless, man, thank you for the super chat. I do appreciate it, my friend. We had another one from Kevin, who says, Ryan, please share something amazing about a 2024 defensive lineman flipping wants to call my nerves. So, Kevin, I mean, I can speak on this a little bit. Obviously, that's not, now it's out there a little bit. So, Nandi Agbako, excuse me for pronouncing his name incorrectly there, who is a 2024 defensive lineman out of the state of North Carolina. His younger brother, is actually also a very good offensive tackle in the 2026 class. Does not have an offer from Notre Dame right now, but I wouldn't be shocked if that changes at some point. But Nandi is currently committed to Georgia. But the big conversation, and everybody I think saw this, I put it on the message board, and I think someone else had reported it on Twitter and all that type of stuff. But Nandi, 6'4", 335 pounds, committed to the University of Georgia out of the state of North Carolina, was on campus this past weekend. Unofficially, he is not decommitted from University of Georgia, so he cannot take an official visit to Notre Dame. But he did take an unofficial visit. And this is one. Yeah, I get it. We are not Marshall, but like, that's not the. Yeah, I'll talk about that in a second. I'm sorry. Let me finish on Nandi for a second. So he is committed to the University of Georgia, took an unofficial visit. He cannot take an official visit to Notre Dame because obviously he's still committed to the University of Georgia, but a player that Notre Dame has been working on for some time now. It's been working now for on the scenes on this young man. Again, 6'4", 335 pounds, physical dude, being looked at as a guy that also could play between 3 and nose, like not just necessarily just a nose type, but a guy that Notre Dame is working on, folks. So, Kevin, am I predicting a flip as of right now? Not necessarily. Would I be shocked if it happened, though? No, I wouldn't be shocked because I think that he is very responsive to Notre Dame, and I think that Notre Dame is working their butts off in that one. So we'll see if that happens, but it's in the works, I guess, if we can put it that way. You know, I think he had a really good visit to Notre Dame. So we shall see. Sean, man, it's so, look, this is the tough part though, because Sean Palace, this made me actually laugh. Said, Ryan, don't read the chats. I have to, man. I'm doing a solo show and I'm doing a mailbag. I have to read the chats. How am I supposed to not read the chats, man? I got to read the chats, like it has to. But yeah, it would be better for my mental health and my attention span. But I have to read the chats, man. I mean, why do I go on Twitter, right? And to hurt myself slowly, I guess. But like, you gotta, man. But yeah, Sean, I wish I could just not read the chat. That's why people have producers, I guess. I need a producer behind the scenes. Salty, be quiet. I'm about to block you. I know, Sean. I did it again, man. But this is fun. I'm having a good time here, guys. I'm having a good time. Hey, I'm a random person, okay? And yeah, Karen, good point there. Yeah, I'm a yeah, no producer today, Archer. I like to have a little more fun on here. All right, I like to keep it loose, keep it going, man. Yeah. I mean, it's a podcast today, so I can do whatever the heck I want. I mean, so yeah, we'll do that. Kevin, thank you for the super chats, though, man. I appreciate it very, very much. I want to respond to this recent comment, and then we'll get back to the live chats. Where or not Marshall said, Ryan, as a fan base, we are tired of this narrative. We want to know how it feels to respond after a program-changing win. Playing angry against a lesser opponent proves zero to me and many others. Dude, I am a Notre Dame fan as well, my friend. You don't think I wanted Notre Dame to win on Saturday? You don't think I want to know that feeling as well? But that's not the reality we are in. We can't respond to a big win because we didn't win on Saturday. We have to respond to the situation that is at hand, not fairy tale land, sir. So, yeah, I think that it's big that you respond to that loss because that is the reality that you are playing to as of today. If they beat Ohio State, then I would be voicing this narrative because that would also be very important. But we can't make up an imagination lands, right? Notre Dame needs to win those games. There's no doubt. Was I pissed off that they lost on Saturday? Absolutely. Do they need to be better? Absolutely. Do they need something to get there? 100%. But I am talking about the reality that we are in. The reality that we are in is that they lost to Ohio State in a very close game in dramatic fashion. What happens next is the most important thing for this team right now. That's the most important thing. What am I going to say? Do you want me to sit here and say, Notre Dame sucks, we're never going to win anything again? No, that's bogus, man. That's bogus. Why would I be a fan if that was my mindset? That's bogus. It's bogus. I want what's best for this program, for this university, for this coaching staff, for these players, ultimately. What happens next is what will define them, in my opinion. Because right now, they're a 4-1 football team that lost to the best team on their schedule. That's the reality. But the reality doesn't have to be just that for the rest of the time here, right? They still have time to change that narrative. So yes, responding is what's next. I would love that to be the reality, but I'm not here to play imagination lands. I'm here to respond to what's happening on a day-to-day basis. So that's my perspective. I hope you respect it. That's my perspective, though. We had another super chat from, let me pull it up. There we go. Shiver Me Fingers. That's funny. Thank you so much for the super chat. We've tasted great quarterback play this year with Sam Hartman, but he leaves this year. Will we be back to square one in 2024? Do we keep going to the portal for quarterbacks? The answer is I don't know. Someone asked this someone asked about this on the chat the other day, or on the message board. And for me, like, one, I'm not thinking about it too much right now. I think ideally, like, shiver me fingers, ideal is that you start developing quarterback play better from a baseline, right? From a foundational perspective, from freshman on up, so that you now can just plug guys away, right? Like, it would be great. I think it would be an ideal situation if like Kenny Minchie was just ready to be that guy in 2024, or if CJ Carr comes in and he's ready to be that guy, and Gino Guidugli and this staff is just developing great quarterbacks. I don't want to be a team that goes to the portal every single year, but I also want to be a team that does what's best for the quarterback position every single year. So if Kenny Minchie isn't ready to play and you don't want to start a true freshman in CJ Carr, going back to the portal might be the option that you do, depending on who's out there. So it's very dependent on what the state of the quarterback room is today, or at the end of the season, or going into the offseason. How confident are you that Minchie's that guy, that CJ Carr is that guy? It really just, there's a lot of variables to really consider, in my opinion. So yeah. I'm sorry for your sorry for that little outburst by me, by the way. My apologies. All right. Oh man, you guys are funny in the chat, by the way. You're super funny. And I hope nobody ever takes anything that I say like offensive. I don't mean it to be offensive if they ever do. But yeah, just Yeah, whatever. I'm sorry, man. I'm getting sidetracked today, guys. This is all your fault. All your fault. Michael Kostrub just said, going to an MLS game Saturday night. Do I keep up with the game live on my phone or do I record it? Avoid my phone all night and watch when I get home. I mean, it's your perspective. It's your prerogative to do whatever you want, Michael. Personally, for me, I would keep up with it on my phone because I just because we live in a world and it's just me. I don't know how deep you are into like social media and stuff, but like I'm going to go on Twitter and it's going to get ruined for me anyway, right? Like I'm not even going to look for it and it's going to be like, here's an alert, here's a tweet, here's something about the game, or here's a recruit texting me that like, oh, they're playing great and they're playing poor. Like it's just going to happen in my world. So like I would just keep up with it on my phone. But if you're like unplugged from the world and like you're not getting any spoilers, it would be cool to just kind of feel the game and see the game in real time, right? As far as like a little bit more of authenticity, I guess, to the watching of football, which is always cool. But for me, I wouldn't be able to get through it. I wouldn't be able to get through it, unfortunately. I just want to read this comment because this actually made me laugh. I love when comments actually make me laugh, man. It's really funny. So Salty Virginia Peanuts just said, it's all good, Ryan. You won't offend anyone. We don't take you that seriously anyway. Thank you. Thank you, Salty. I appreciate you, sir. I appreciate you. Yeah. Funny. I laugh, you know, ha, ha, ha. Actually, that was really funny, but I'm not going to give Salty too much credit for being funny. Next question, Omar Alston. We had a couple questions that were similar-ish, so I wanted to get to a couple of those in a row if I can. Omar Alston just said, any insight on why this is the 2025 class? On why the 2025 class could get to 6. I think because now you're so Omar, like you need to look at like what's going to happen after this season and then potentially after next season, right? It's so does Riley Mills return next season? We'll see. Howard Cross could also be gone after this year. Javonte John Baptiste is certainly gone after this year. Nana Osafo-Mensah could be gone, depending. I mean, but regardless, is those guys will all be gone after 2024. Like, there's no doubt about that, right? And then you're also talking about that next wave of like Jordan Botelho will be gone. And so it's just natural attrition. And I think Notre Dame just wants to continue to stockpile that talent, right? Like you're always going to take 4 to 6 anyway, most years, but I think it's going to be a little bit bigger defensive line class because there are some upperclassmen there, right? I mean, I just named them: Riley Mills, Howard Cross, Javonte Jean Baptiste, Jordan Botelho. Like they're going to be out of eligibility over the next couple of years. So yeah, so it's going to be a little bit of a bigger class. I think Karen had asked, yep. All right. So Karen had something similar-ish, at least on topic of this. So let me find it. Oh, no, I'm sorry. It wasn't Karen. Kevin Carter was the one that asked. Okay. So I'll bring Kevin's question now. Kevin Carter said, with a possibility of a 5 to 6 lineman class, who are your heavy hitters not named Christopher Burgess? For me, it's actually a really good question. So Kevin, for me, like so strong side defensive end. We already know that Joseph Reef's in the class. Christopher Burgess, a part of the question. Viper, I think, is super interesting because there's a lot of guys I like, but then we have to talk about like what was realistic to the Notre Dame class, which is kind of a more important thing for me. So you have obviously CJ May in the class. I think guys like Jaden Woods out of the state of Kansas is a really good football player, a guy that I would love Notre Dame to make a heavy push for. I don't necessarily know. I mean, they don't have a ton of traction there as of right now, but still guys like Bryce Davis have talked glowingly about Notre Dame in the past. I think Austin Alexander was a young man that was offered by Notre Dame a couple months ago out of the state of Kentucky. He's Sean Alexander's nephew. London Merritt's a guy they like, but they need to get into campus. Damian Shanklin, who's an Indiana kid, is another Viper type. And I also think you guys like Justin Hill out of the state of Ohio that I think is a long shot for Notre Dame. He's probably going to end up with Ohio State, but those are a few names. But I would say at Viper, like it's a wait and see type of conversation of like who's the next guy. Inside, I think you're going to take one more defensive tackle. I think for me, the guy I like most right now is Jarquez Carter out of Florida. He's more of a 3 tech because you have Davion Dixon, who's more of like that true nose. So I think adding a 3 tech with some penetration style ability, I think would be pretty big. So he'd be a guy that I would keep a heavy eye on. And then outside of that, it's like get some versatile defensive linemen that have length, and then maybe their linebackers that have length, maybe their defensive linemen eventually. So there's a lot of talent on the board, man. A lot of talent. But I will say this: defensive line recruiting for the rest of the cycle, I still have questions of like who the players are that Notre Dame is necessarily going to really target, right? Like CJ was a guy that I knew Notre Dame liked for a while. We knew about Davion for a long time. I didn't know that they would push this hard early on, to be completely on for Joseph Reef. Like I didn't necessarily see that one coming, but we know that Christopher Burgess is a guy that they love. So a little bit of insight, but some questions that need to be answered still. All right, let's get to some more questions here. We had Brandon Plensner with a question. Brandon says, how do you feel about Notre Dame filling up the running back class already with these two players specifically? Did they take them too soon or should they have waited? Film or offer lists are average, in my opinion. So, I mean, Brandon, one thing I would say to that is about the offer list thing is that I think that the offer list for Justin Thurman was like blowing up, man. Like he had a lot of offers. The offer list for Mr. Anderson is a little bit limited, right? As far as right now, like he had like Ole Miss and like a couple of Southern schools, but it's not like the most impressive offer list of all time. What I would say though, for me, is I think Notre Dame. I actually do like the players in theory. Oh my gosh. Sorry, I'm not Beezer 12 washing beard. I'm not putting that up on on the screen, by the way. I'm sorry, sir, but I just saw your question earlier, and that was funny. But yeah, yeah. Um, back to this question though. My apologies, Brandon. I'd liked taking the gamble on just Thurman. I did. Did you take him a little bit early? Maybe, just in the simple fact that like he still needed to show like proven production. He hasn't gotten off to a fast start as a junior, but I also think that we need to remember that he's a junior in high school, right? Like he has plenty of time to take that jump, and you can't teach speed ultimately. So with what you have in the running back room, I mean, when you get to campus, and if 2025 kid, the running backs on campus are going to be Jeremiah Love, going to be Aeneas Williams, Keedron Young, Jabron Payne will probably most likely still be there. So, like, you're going to be in a really good spot from a running back situation perspective. You are. So, I'm okay with taking gambles on guys, and especially taking gambles on guys with an elite trait. And he has an elite trait. He's incredibly fast, man, incredibly fast. So, I was okay with that one actually. I am also, in my opinion anyway, like I'm very okay with taking I'm okay with taking Daniel Anderson because I think that he is a very underrated player. I really liked his film a ton. I like his film right now more than Justin Thurman. I think Justin Thurman has more upside, but I really am just like I'm very high on, I'm very high on the floor of that young man. Like I think he's going to be a really good football player. So did you take Justin Thurman maybe a little bit early? I'm just going to say for like the for the projection, maybe a little bit, but I was okay with it. I'm still okay with it. I still think he's going to end up being a good player for Notre Dame. And I ultimately though I trust just Dylan McCullough. I just trust him. I think that he's going to get the most out of those two players. I think they're going to be developed very well. So I understand if there's some skepticism about it, 100% understand it, but I think Notre Dame's going to be just fine at the running back position. We had another super chat. I think this was from Corey Flynn. Thank you, Corey. How much of the lack of deep shots versus Ohio State was receivers not getting separation? How much do you think it was game plan? Felt like last year's game plan. I mean, there were some outside shots. I think that it was Corey. This is just my perspective. I haven't watched the all 22 on the right from like the wide angle yet, so I haven't seen what the wide receivers were doing in real time. It felt like the wide receivers weren't creating a ton of separation. That's what it felt like to me, to be very honest. I thought pass blocking was good. I didn't see a ton of pressure on Sam Hartman, so I think it's probably a combination of both. You know that I'm very much a person that's like, it's never one side completely. It's usually a combination of things. So I'm sure there was some maybe hesitancy. I also think Ohio State was playing to not give up big plays in this game because I think Ohio State came into this game knowing that like this was a different Notre Dame team, and they were like one of the most explosive teams in college football through 4 games. So I don't think they wanted to get beat over top necessarily. But I also think that the wide receivers weren't good enough this past Saturday. I do. I don't think they were good enough. I think there were a lot of great moments, right? Like Chris Tyree had that big catch and run early in the football game off the mesh. Jaden Greathouse had a big catch in the football game. Rico Flores played really well. I mean, there was Tobias Merriweather had one big play. I mean, there were some really good moments, but I don't think that it was consistent, right? So I think the lack of consistency definitely did hurt Notre Dame wide receiver. I would be lying if I said that it was, but yeah. Thank you, though, Corey. I very much appreciate you, sir. Very much, as always. We had a question that I just wanted to hit on real quick from Pasquale, who said, is Nathaniel Marshall a priority on the board? No, Pasquale, we've been talking about that for a couple months, but I would not anticipate Notre Dame spending much time on Nathaniel Marshall. The fit just would not make much sense there. So that one just they liked him a lot as a player, but unfortunately, it's just not going to work. It's just not going to work. So Nathaniel Marshall, I wouldn't even think about that one too much. To be honest. Next question is from Brian J. Irish. Says, is not knowing that you have 10 guys out on the field for 2 consecutive plays the same equivalent as not knowing what 2 + 2 is? My trust in the staff took a big hit. I get that. I think there's in some decision-making scenarios, I 100% agree, Brian. There's still questions that I have with the staff. There's no doubt. I didn't love the whole situation that happened with the 10 players last 2 plays for a couple of different reasons. One, there was a mistake that happened there. Whether it was a defensive coordinator mistake or a defensive line coach mistake, there was a mistake that had happened to only have 3 defensive linemen on the field to be missing a defensive lineman. There was a mistake that happens. The other side, though, is I didn't love Coach Freeman's answer to the whole situation where he had said, we didn't want to have a penalty for a substitution situation. I didn't love that. I didn't love his response to that because you were at like the 1 yard line or 2 yard line at that point. It's like half the distance is probably better than playing with 10 guys. I mean, would you rather face 4th and goal from the 1.5 yard line with 10 players, or would you rather face 1st and goal inside the 1 with 11 players? Like that, so I just didn't think that one made much sense to me as far as like an explanation on that. I just think that there was a mistake that happened ultimately. I don't think it's as simple as saying like people can't count, but like it was a mistake that happened from a substitution perspective. Again, defensive line coach, defense coordinator. I don't know whose mistake it necessarily was, but I would have loved if they were aware of it. This is my opinion. After the first play where you had 10, where you got away with it, if you were aware of it, I would have loved the coach to have been like, get another shot on there. We'll take half the distance. 4th down. We'll still play, because I just think that would have been a more appropriate situation. So it was a bad look, man. And yeah, I mean, I hope that they learn from it. I hope that type of situation doesn't happen again, because it was not great. No doubt about it. John Mayernich says, why are we taking an unranked nothing but a project defensive end from 2025 when 2025 is supposed to be loaded? This reeks of Brian Kelly. John, I am going to be very honest about this, okay? Because I think you guys believe I'm an honest person. I think I'm a pretty dang honest person. For me, and again, this is just my opinion, I don't know if I would have taken this commitment as of right now. Just me. I would have liked to see a lot more from Joseph Reif. I don't know if I would have prioritized him right now. But the fact of the matter is that you can call him an unranked, nothing but a project defensive end all you want, but that doesn't mean that that's what Notre Dame thinks he is, right? I can show my criticisms or my questions about Joseph Reif, but that doesn't mean that that's what Notre Dame believes. Notre Dame likes Joseph Reif a lot, which is why they took his commitments. They were pushing for him. It wasn't just like Joseph Reif showed up and was like, dude, I want to commit. Can I commit? And they're like, yeah, sure. No, like they were pushing for Joseph Reif. He was a guy that they really liked. So your opinion might be different than the coaching staff's. Ultimately, what happens when he gets to Notre Dame and what he does on campus is all that's going to matter. And that could that could prove everybody wrong, right? It could prove a lot of people wrong. I do know also that there's some people that I respect their opinions that are a lot higher on Joseph Reif than maybe myself, like a couple other people that I've talked to. So we'll see what happens, man. But Notre Dame does not think that he's a unranked nothing. And I also disagree with your sentiment. I don't think he's a project. I don't think he's a project. I don't know if he has a great ceiling, but I think he's got a pretty high floor. Like he reminds me of, actually, I don't want to make the comparison. I think that he has a pretty high floor because I think he's a physical kid that plays really hard. At worst, I wouldn't say he's a project. I wouldn't. I actually would question if his ceiling's that high. But yeah, yep. All right, let's go now to Brian J. Irish had another question. He said, "What's your take on Riley Mills? I thought he would have a big game against Josh Simmons. I was a little disappointed. I say give Jason Onye more snaps." I mean, I'm for giving Jason Onye more snaps. I think he's a really talented player. I wouldn't say that. So Riley Mills is a 3 tech, and Josh Simmons is an offensive tackle. So he's not playing against Josh Simmons a ton, right? Like I'm sure there's a couple reps that maybe he got some action on him. My thoughts on Riley Mills is I think Riley Mills has played well this season. I think he is playing really well at the point of attack and making plays at the line of scrimmage. I don't think that he has taken the jump that I wanted him to as a playmaker. And that's partly Riley, but it's also partly coaching. Because I don't think he's necessarily asked to, I don't think they take the shackles off him and just let him go all the time. I don't. So I think he's played well for the role he's been asked to play. Is he as impactful as a behind the line of scrimmage type player that I would have liked him to be this season? No. But I also don't think that's all Riley's fault. I don't. So I was hoping for a bigger impact, but I don't think he's playing bad football. Like there's this big misnomer in the Notre Dame community, which I completely disagree with, that think that Riley Mills has played not well this year. I'm just like, no, he's played well. Just maybe not what you wanted him to be well, right? Like I think his role is just a little different than what we hoped it would be. So just my perspective. We had another question that was from T Smith 0323. How do recruits look at Notre Dame after last week's game? Most recruits, I think, were impressed with Notre Dame because so it's an interesting question. All the recruits that I've talked to were impressed. Most of them, I think, are very level headed. I mean, there's a lot of players that were like, it didn't end the way that you would have wanted it to, but that's football type of thing. I think Anthony Sacco was the one that said it to me. It's like it's football. It's how it happens. But I think a lot of recruits were very impressed. Obviously, going toe to toe with Ohio State's a good thing. They would have loved them to win the game, but ultimately they were more impressed by just everything around Notre Dame. The energy, the excitement, the coaching staff. So I think that there was a very positive outlook on Notre Dame after the game. I just think that now Notre Dame needs to take the next step and just be like, there's no questions and there's no questions left, right? I mean, there's still some questions left. But I really think that they have a chance to continue to recruit at a high level because of the impact that they're having so far. Ryan Loftus had a question. If I can get it pulled up, that would be absolutely great. I'm going to run through a few of these a little bit faster because we still got 30-something questions, man. I'm one person. Ryan Loftus says, do you think Notre Dame has a good chance to bounce back as a playoff run? And how do you feeling about USC now? I think that Notre Dame can win every game left on the schedule. I do. I think they could beat Duke. I think they could beat USC. I think they could beat everybody on the schedule if they are locked in. I like to think that they will be locked in because I like to think that this is going to be a team that is built off of character and has that juice and that energy I always talk about. But ultimately, I don't know. This week is going to tell me a lot, Ryan. And if Notre Dame comes out and they play a really good game against Duke or dominate them, then I feel good about where the rest of the season is going to go. If they come out, though, where it's just like win a close one that just wasn't pretty or lose the football game, then, that's kind of a precursor, I think, a little bit. So I think the Duke game is going to be very telling for a lot of different reasons this week. We had a question from Five Burkhart Boys who says, is Cam Williams a deep threat? It seems in these big games, we need a dog to stretch the field. So this is actually funny. I was talking to Brian Driscoll about Cam Williams the other day. So he is a player that I think was kind of, so when he committed after a sophomore year, I actually think he was more of not a possession receiver. That's not a good way to phrase it, but like more of a just good all around player, right? Like pretty nuanced, smooth, good speed. But I'll tell you what, as a junior, he took a massive step forward from speed, explosiveness perspective. And as a senior, it's even better. Like this kid can run, man. Like he could take the top off of defense. So yes, he is a deep threat. He's also an all-around player. He's not just a deep threat either. It's not like this is like a one-trick pony type of player as well. But to your question, is he a deep threat? Yes, he could take the top off, man. That kid is an elite level recruit, in my opinion. He is an absolute stud. Cam Williams, yeah. I think there's a great conversation at the top of the 2024 board of wide receivers, by the way. I mean, like Jeremiah Smith is excellent. Micah Hudson, I've been a big fan of for a long time. I think Ryan Wingo's talent's phenomenal. But Cam Williams should be in the conversation with just about any of those guys, man. Like he can fly, man. He can run. But he's a complete wide receiver too. Dynamic player. I think he's the best wide receiver Notre Dame will sign in a pretty decent amount of time. Like he's really, really good, man. Notre Dame has a great one in Cam Williams. We had a question here from Mr. Sanders. Says, are we recruiting any kickers? Can keep going to the portal for one and dones that stuck. I mean, you just went to a portal for a kid that's the starting kicker for the New Orleans Saints last year. I know he wasn't phenomenal for Notre Dame, but like suck, I think is just a little strong. Just a little strong, right? But I'm interested to see because I think that foundationally, Brian Mason was more of a transfer portal kicker guy. Will Marty Biaggi be a guy that goes more from the high school route? It's still a wait and see approach to me because I'm sorry, like I do the best I can with recruiting coverage, but like kicker recruiting coverage, not my forte. When a guy commits in that situation, right? So I'm interested to see though what that perspective is though. Brian J. Irish asked, and I just wanted to hit on this because I said it earlier, but just in case anybody's hopping in that wasn't here earlier, is there going to be an Upon Rehearsal review show later? I'll be curious to hear the IB crew thoughts on that game and also their thoughts about Coach Marcus Freeman's press conference. So, yes, 8 o'clock tonight, 8 o'clock Eastern time, Brian Driscoll and Vince D'Addario will have Upon Further Review. Got delayed today, but it will be tonight, Monday night, 8 o'clock Eastern time. We had our next questions from 99 Problems, but BK ain't one. He said, to me, it seems like Dieland's preference is to pair an all-around running back with running backs with an elite traits. Jabron Payne and Jadarian Price. I get yelled at for saying Jadarian, even though that's how everyone said it for millions of years. But sure, Aeneas Williams and Kedron Young and Anderson and Thurman. So it's actually an intro. Yeah. I think I actually haven't thought about that too much, 99 Problems, but I think that you can make that distinction. Yeah, because I think in this situation, Jabron Payne is more of the all-purpose player. Price is more of the home run threat, dynamite speed. Aeneas Williams is more of the all-purpose back. Kedron Young is more of the explosive, strong, powerful back. Then you got Daniel Anderson, who's more of the all-purpose back, and then Justin Thurman's more of the speed threats. So, yeah, I think that's an interesting distinction. I think you can go there. I would accept that. I would accept that premise, sir. I would accept it. All right. And we had Salty Virginia Pizza. I said, I don't even know what I almost said. So I'm so tired, guys. By the way, I hope you guys enjoyed that Saturday show, the post-game show, because that night I got home at like 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock from that show, and my daughter decided to wake up at 5:30. So that was fun, man. That was fun. I was running on fumes on Sunday, absolute fumes. But yeah. But hope you enjoyed that. Salties, though, how many more commitments are you expecting over the period leading up to USC, Ryan? So next few weeks, I would say publicly. Public versus silent is always a question, Salty. I think that we might see one or two more in that duration, and then USC is going to be another big recruiting weekend, so I wouldn't be surprised if there's a little bit of headway that happens there. So I'll say we'll set the over-under at 2.5 between now and USC as far as public guys that make decisions. So I don't know if I would take the over or the under on that yet, but I will set the over-under there at 2.5. Gotta love having kids, man. Gotta love having kids, right, guys? We had a question from Nathan Milton. She had back-to-back from Nathan Milton. Watch some. Oh, wait, sorry. I think he had. Okay, the other one was kind of like a continuation, so I'll pop that one up instead. We had Nathan Milton said, watch some CJ May's film, and he looks really aggressive and tough. What are your thoughts on his agility, quickness, and bend? I think the bend's actually pretty good. I think he's more of a linear, explosive kid, so he's going to win more as far as like his first step. But I think his bend's pretty good. Quickness is a little bit more hard to tell because he's just not asked to be used in space a ton as far as like dropping and playing on the second level. But I think the bend and the agility and the explosiveness is good on CJ May. So I like him, man. I think he's a really good football player. I'm excited about him. I'm very, very much excited about him. There's no doubt. CJ, I thought was a big hit for Notre Dame this weekend. We had a question from about CJ May again from Jay Henry, who says, "How does CJ May's game compare with Logan Thomas and Bryce Young?" Doesn't compare at all to Bryce Young. Bryce Young is going to be a strong side defensive end, physical dude, incredibly long. Similar-ish to Logan. I think Logan's a little bit looser than CJ, but I think they're both explosive dudes that have good length. So I think that there is some comparison that you can have between those two, in my opinion. All right. Next question is going to be from Florida Irish, who says, which Florida kids should we have our eyes on in terms of them being serious recruits for Notre Dame? For 2025, I guess is what you're asking me. It's a great question. So I'm trying to think 2025 kids that are even on the board from Florida that are in serious contention for Notre Dame. I don't think there's that many as of right now. Here, give me 1 second. 2025 Florida kids. All right. So you already have your running backs. You already have Justin Thurman in the class out of the state of Florida. So you're good there. Jamie French is committed to Alabama. So you're not there with him. Kobe Howard, I would keep a small eye on at wide receiver. I don't know if I would say that he is necessarily a guy that is, if Notre Dame is going to push for, but I think that he is a really talented player that is really getting back strong from his injury. So I would just keep an eye on him just to be sure, right? Like that, I think that's kind of where I am with him. Defensive line wise, I mentioned Jarquez Carter already as a player that I think Notre Dame is pretty high on as a defensive tackle in the class, potentially a guy that I can think that they'll continue to recruit. Florida up. So linebacker Gavin Nix out of IMG Academy, a guy that Notre Dame has their eye on at linebacker. Defensive back wise, Jace Cora was just on campus out of the state of Florida as well. And Jace Cora is a guy that was on at Florida now. He's out of Naples, Florida. He's a 6'4" safety. But I think that the safety that you need to keep a close eye on is Ivan Taylor out of the state of Florida. He is the son of Ike Taylor, who's a great cornerback, obviously, in the NFL, a guy that Notre Dame is very high on, and he likes Notre Dame a lot as well. He'll be back for the Pitt game as well. So Ivan Taylor is definitely a guy to look at. And Dallas Golden at cornerback is another guy to keep an eye on. He, of course, is the former high school teammate of Keon Keeley, who was once committed to Notre Dame and now playing at the University of Alabama. So a cornerback, Dallas Golden, that Notre Dame likes as well. So Jarquez Carter, Gavin Nix, Ivan Taylor, J.C. Cora, and I already said Ivan Taylor and Dallas Golden. There's a few names for you. It's an interesting point here that I just want to highlight real quick. Andrew Sal says, "Hey Ryan, I think for the future to put Jeremiah Love at wide receiver with Cam Williams. That's two guys that would stretch the top of the defense." You are correct on the second part that I think both players would stretch the top of the defense. There's no doubt, but I want to see more about. I want to see more about Jeremiah Love being used out of the backfield as a receiver than as a true wide receiver. He's a running back. He runs like a running back. He's physical. He's downhill. But there are a lot of things that you can use him as. Like I would line him up in the slot at times. I would run some wheels with him out of the backfield, some choice routes. Like he can do that type of stuff, right? He's a running back that can be a difference maker in the passing game as well, but not a wide. He's not a wide receiver though. He's a really good running back that can also do some things for you in the pass game. But I agree with you in the sense that they need to utilize that explosiveness in the passing game, especially when he's the focal point of the offense. All right. Some great questions today, guys. Appreciate y'all, man. Really do. All right. We have This question is from Notre Dame Cheat Sheet, who said, what are your thoughts on Notre Dame getting kids from Florida, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Alabama so far in the class? With the exception of Florida, these are states we constantly hear are near impossible for Notre Dame to recruit. And I think it's big time, man. It's big time. I mean, you got a top 200 caliber, I think he's a top 150 caliber defensive end at least out of the state of Alabama that had an offer from Georgia. You got that kid out of the South. You got a top 100, I would say top 50 caliber quarterback out of Mississippi, right? That had offers from Alabama, Ole Miss, Tennessee, all those guys. You got a running back out of Arkansas. You got two players out of the state of Florida in the class as well. I mean, it's needed, I would say, and I think it's telling as well. Notre Dame is tapping into every market, but I think they're seeing that they can make waves in the Southeast in 2025 because there's some players I think kind of fit Notre Dame. So I think it's incredible. It's wonderful. I mean, having that, I think, kind of open up a lot of different doors, which I think you haven't had open consistently throughout the last few years. So I think it's big time, man. I cannot emphasize this enough. But getting to the start that you have in the Southeast for the positions that you've gotten out of the Southeast so far, I think is exceptional. It's great to see. All right. So now we're going to go to Joe Allen, who said game day is going to Duke next week. Do you think they will be going to get their pokes in on Notre Dame? I mean, I think the people that usually poke at Notre Dame will continue to poke at Notre Dame, Joe. But like, I don't think Notre Dame did anything last week to like lose respect from a national perspective, right? Like, I don't think you went out of that game and said like you thought less of Notre Dame than what you did going into the game. I think the people that will poke fun at them are Ohio State alumni and Michigan alumni, right? Like talking about college game day. I think you guys catch my drift on that one, right? Like I think that there's just going to be some people that are always going to poke fun at Notre Dame, and but I don't think that they have a lack of respect from the people that aren't biased, in my opinion. We had another question from Jay Henry. He said, is Al Washington still following the size and athleticism concept with the 2025 defensive line? Yeah, for the most part, Jay, I would say that he's looking for players that definitely fit a profile. I think that he is trying to find players that, fit that SEC type of outlook, right? You want some bigger body guys. That's why they're going after Nandi Agoko, who's, committed to the university, or Agboko, excuse me, that's committed to the University of Georgia. They want guys that look like that dude. So I think that they are still looking. I mean, if they get Christopher Burgess, he's going to be a 6'4", 265 plus pound defensive end on the next level. I think CJ May, when he fills out, is going to be a 6'4" plus 250 pounds Viper. I think that Joseph Reif is going to be a 6'5", 270 pounds defensive end at some point. I think that Davion Dixon is going to be a 6'2.5", 315, 320 pound nose when all is said and done. So yeah, he's still looking at those size profiles, man. He wants size up front. And I don't blame him for that, as long as it's impact size. I don't want size just to have size. I want size that can also play. So, yeah. We had Archer. What's up, Archer? Archer says, even with the loss, the recruiting momentum still seems to be full steam ahead. Agree. Do you think this is indicative of a strong culture Marcus Freeman established? Yeah, Archer, I would say so. I think that for me, it was a funny kind of feedback from the weekend, because like most recruits were just kind of like, oh, you would love to win, but like, still played a good game, still play hard, all that type of stuff, right? But I really think that it's more about they're talking constantly about the coaches, about the culture, about the fans, about just the energy, like that type of thing. So I think it's the full encompassing thing. That's really continuing to appeal to Notre Dame recruits, I would say, for sure. PA Irish guy says, are these new recruits gap closers? That's a great question. I think running back, you've already kind of closed the gap, in my opinion, man. Like I really don't think there's a 5-man running back room in college football like Notre Dame has anymore. So I would say, if anything, Daniel Anderson just continues to strengthen that gap a little bit, right? Like at least steadies the gap. I mean, if you want to phrase it like that, I think CJ May closes the gap for sure. Yes, he's a Viper that you need more of. So I think that he closes the gap. Joseph Reef doesn't close the gap for me. Like, I think he's a solid football player. I wouldn't necessarily call him a gap closer though. I wouldn't do that. But I think CJ May is for sure. And I think that Daniel Anderson just adds another good running back to an already loaded running back room, which is very important. We had a question from Jimmy James says, is Christopher Burgess your top defensive end prospect for Notre Dame? He is for me. His highlights show he plays with urgency and violence. For the players that are realistic options, yes. Christopher Burgess is my top defensive end on the board. I think he has top 50 upside as a football player. That kid can be as good as he wants to be or as good as his coaches allow him to be. I think he has tremendous potential. All right. Next question from PA Irish guy says, in your opinion, outside of cornerback, what gaps are closed? I know running back and linebacker are close. I also exclude offensive line and tight end for obvious reasons. Go Irish. This is a great question. So which gaps are closed? I'm just reading through the chat to make sure we're good here. Because I saw someone put some pancakes in there, like someone need to get put in timeout, but yeah, I don't know. All right, cool. So what are closed? I think running back is definitely closed at this point. I think tight end has been closed. Offensive line is closed. Cornerback is closed. That's it. Yeah, I would say cornerback, running back, tight ends, offensive. I wouldn't say tight end right now. I think tight end is very good, but I wouldn't say. I would say I would say it's on par, but I wouldn't say. It's a tough one, actually. All right, I'll throw a tight end in there. I'll say running back, tight end, offensive line, cornerback. Those are the gaps that are closed. That's the gaps that are closed, in my opinion. All right, and then let's go to the next one here. Oh, Salty said this one earlier. I just wanted to comment on it. Ryan, what about Gerby Lambert? Ryan. So Salty, I didn't mention Gerby Lambert because I did an extra recruiting show over the weekend, man. I'm very upset that you did not listen to it. You actually hurt my feelings here. So I might block you at some point. I'm going to ask you that you make a Twitter so that I can block you on there as well. All right. So I talked about Gerby Lambert. Man, it was a great pickup. Great pickup. Make a Twitter so I can block you. Please, Salty. Please. If you love me, you'll do that for me. Next question is from A. Bent Notre Dame, who says, does the push for the defensive line committee to UGA signal that they won't be able to make any movement with Justin Scott? Also, does the push for the defensive line commit to UGA signal that they won't be able to make any movement with Justin Scott? Also, how do you think Keon Keeley is enjoying Ryan the bench Alabama? I'm not going to comment on Keon, man. I think he's going to be a tremendous player at Alabama whenever he gets on the field consistently. The Georgia thing is interesting. So I'll just say that there was maybe an overpromise of how many defensive line were being taken at Georgia. It was kind of a situation that we're in for that one. I don't think Justin Scott ends up with Georgia regardless. I think that he probably still stays up north in the end. So I don't think it's going to end up mattering, but it's going to be interesting to watch defensive line recruiting for the rest of the cycle for Georgia because there's a little bit of smoke there, man. So we'll see what obviously happens for the rest of that cycle. All right. We had another question here from Matthew Brosha. How do you position a coach to a player who won't be on campus for 2 more years, not knowing 100% of that coach will still be here? Matthew, I think because it's the full pitch, right? I don't think there's any player that is promised that a coach will still be there when they get to campus. And if I'm talking about a 2025 kid, what you can though say easily is that Notre Dame will still be there, right? And that it will be in a great place to moving forward. I think that's what you kind of pitch. It's the 4 for 40. It's the development. It's the education. It's everything that Notre Dame entails. So it's not just a promise of, I'll be there for you for 4 years, because we know that movement happens so much. It's just not sustainable for you to just say, like, you're going to have the same coaching staff for 10 years. Like, it's just never going to happen. But I think that it's just kind of that realization of what Notre Dame can bring to you full scope, which is what you can promise. So that's the pitch. That's the pitch. You need to refine the pitch. All right. So we had another question from Nathan Milton. Just want to hit on this one real quick. He said, if it would come up, it'd be great. Nathan Milton, any chance Davis Andrews doesn't go on a mission? Nathan, I think that has been decided. Unless something dramatically changes, I would be surprised if he does not go on a mission. So I do anticipate him going on a warm mission. Yes. We had a question from Carmel Humphrey, who says Derek Meadows seems like a must get and feels like a Notre Dame lean. With Talon Taylor, Cooper Beebe, and Jerome Bettis Jr., which one gets left out if all wants Notre Dame? Oh man, Carmel, I'd rather not answer this one, but yeah, so nicely, right? Like, I think that Notre Dame would always take Talon Taylor, always. I think that they would always take Derek Meadows. I think they would also take Jerome Bettis Jr. If you only were able to take 3, and it was just out of those 4, I think Cooper Perry would be the one that would be left looking. But I think ultimately Notre Dame is going to take 4. I do. Because you can't let that happen, man. Whether it's Cooper Perry or Dalen McCutcheon or somebody else that's really talented, like, take the 4. Just take it, man. Numbers are going to work out. I promise you in the end, numbers are going to work out. But I hope we don't have to get in that situation where it's like you can only take 3. I would be very, very upset if that happens, but we'll see. Shall see, man. Ugh, such a tough question though. One I didn't want to answer either, to be honest with you, respectfully. Archer 452. When kids attend games between teams that are both recruiting them heavily, does the outcome of the game ever have any impact whatsoever on their eventual commitment? I've always heard it doesn't. I think that we overemphasize how much a victory is in a game that players visit. I mean, I think of just last year, guys, the 2 game visits that Jeremiah Love went on last year before making his commitments? It was Cal and Stanford last year. So most kids, I don't think, really care about that outcome. They're more worried about like what the program's going to be when they get there, right? But I would say this, Archer, is that it never hurts, right? Like if I'm a Notre Dame Ohio State recruit, that's my final 2, would a win sway me in one direction necessarily if it's like neck and neck? I guess it's possible, but like I think that we do overemphasize how important a win is when a player goes to a campus visit. Like I just do. We had another question from Brian Shaw. It says, does Dylan McCullough being done with 2025 backs allow him to help with the other position coaches for 2025? Yes, Brian, it can. It 100% can. I think he'll be recruiting some 2026 running backs, obviously. But I do think that there is going to be more of an ability for him to be a little bit more flexible in other recruitments as well. So yeah, I think that it can definitely help, no doubt. We had another question from Archer 452 says, does beating USC in a month break the Bush push curse? What would you change about the coaching performance from Saturday to the next top 10 matchup? It'll never Bush push curse. I mean, Archer, look, that game is going to be cemented in my mind for eternity because that was a great USC team. I don't think this USC team is as good as the Bush push team, obviously, but it's a really good team though. It's a team that could potentially contend for a playoff spot and maybe a championship. It's a massive game, and I'll just leave it at that, right? Notre Dame, that's the big game on the schedule at this point. Now Clemson has 2 losses. Duke is going to be a really good team, but like USC is that team that everyone on Notre Dame should have their own circle on their schedule. Like that's a game that's going to be telling for Notre Dame in a lot of ways. So it's going to be massive. I don't know about curses and all that type of stuff, but like Notre Dame needs to win that football game. They need to win that football game. Because if you don't win that football game, then you are who you were last year, just maybe a little bit better, right? Because you still lose to USC and Ohio State. And those are the team that you need to show that you can beat consistently, those types of teams. We had Michael Castro, who just says, any 2024 defensive backs that could be the next BMO counterpart when Cam Hart leaves. Dude, I think that for me, when Cam Hart leaves, I think that Christian Gray would be my pick for who's that next guy that's going to be the dude. But I wouldn't be surprised if Leonard Moore comes in and is just like, oh, that guy's really good. We underestimated that kid a little bit. I don't understand his ranking, guys. I mean, he does it on both sides of the ball for Round Rock, too. Like, that dude's good, man. Leonard Moore's really good. He's 6'2", can run, is pretty flexible for his size, and is long as heck. What am I missing with Leonard Moore? I don't really know what I'm missing. I'm not saying he's going to come in and be a freshman All-American like Benjamin Morrison was, but like I wouldn't be shocked if he's playing as a freshman. Like I would not be shocked at all. I think that kid's really good, man. I think he's really, really good. All right, so let's go to. We had Beezer12 Washing Beard says, do you know if there's any stock in that rumor that Coach Freeman made the team watch the final 4 minutes of the game in the stadium? Saw quite a few people talking about that today. I have no idea. I can ask Brian about it because I'm sure maybe he's heard if that is actual thing, but I don't hate it though if that is a thing. I don't hate it because I think there's 2 things you can get out of that, right? Is one, there were mistakes made as a coaching staff, but also as a team that need to be figured out. And telling the team, making the team watch it from Coach Freeman's perspective, it means that he's also watching it, which means coaches are also watching it, right? So I think that matters. Number 2, though, is that you never want that feeling again, right? You never want it again. And watching it again will probably make some dudes sick to their stomach, to be honest. So I don't hate that at all if that is actually what happened. I don't hate it at all. We Are Not Marshall says, is it too late to establish a go-to outside threat for the offense? Hartman threw it deep a ton at Wake Forest, but it was hit Trout City on Saturday. I still think there's time. Yeah. I mean, I think that Tobias Merriweather is a guy that can create some of those outside plays. I think he needs to be more consistent with it. Chris Tyree can take the top off, but obviously he's not an outside receiver. He's an inside receiver. But I do think that Tobias has a chance to be that type of guy. I think Braylon James also could be that guy. Not this season, obviously, for Sam Hartman's sake, but I think Tobias could be that guy for them. Yeah. Let me bring this one up. PK said, can you explain to me why Joshua Burnham only gets 4 snaps? I remember one where he showed great speed rushing down the Ohio State running back. Why is it happening? I mean, I think he's a redshirt freshman that that's still figuring it out a little bit. Should he be playing more, PK? Yeah, I think he should be. I think he should be. And this guy's getting blocked. Oh man, that was my first guy I had to block today. That's fun. See you later, guy. Ugh, guys are stupid. Yeah, but PK, sorry, back to your question. I think he should be playing more. I mean, just point blank. Like I think he should be playing more, but I would assume that it's something to do with comfortability out there right now for him. Because again, I think we do need to remember like this is only his 2nd year of playing defensive end ever. So it's still developing and physically developing as well. So, but I think he should be playing more. There's no doubt about it. I would no doubt he should be playing. We only had a couple questions left. Let's get through these. So we had Beezer12 Washing Beard who says, how do recruits generally look at a close loss like this? Do they get worried or are they more likely to be motivated and think they need to win this in the future? I think the way they usually look at it for most recruits, this isn't the same for everyone, right? Because everyone's different. But I think most recruits look at it and say, I could be the difference. Like make it or break it, right? Like I could, if I'm like Cam Williams, for instance, like he's committed to Notre Dame, he's been rock solid for a long time, right? But if I'm Cam Williams, I watched that game and he was in attendance Saturday, and I say, they're a good team. Notre Dame's a good team, but I can take them to new heights. I can be the difference, right? Like that's something I've seen like consistently. Guys that commit to Notre Dame and sign with Notre Dame have that mentality. Like I could be the difference here, right? To get us back to prominence. I could be that type of guy. So I think that that's my opinion of it is like the most recruits that end up at Notre Dame are those guys that think that they could be the difference maker. And I think it's most recruits in general, but like just from my experience with Notre Dame recruits. Yeah. We had another question from Ray Holcraft. So in your opinion, do you think Benjamin Morrison and Cam Hart comprise the best cornerback duo in the country? And what attributes make Mike Mickens such a great corner coach? Second part, I think it's just the attention to detail. He played the cornerback position and he played at a high level. I think also Mike Mickens was not the most talented cornerback of all time. He was more a very smart, heady football player. So I think usually those types of players understand the nuances of the position, like the finer details. And I think that his attention to those details is very important in developing these cornerbacks. Are they the best cornerback duo in college football? I think they're close. I mean, I would honestly need to sit down and just kind of think like cornerback duos like Kool-Aid McKinstry and Terrion Arnold come to mind, right? I mean, they're at least top 2 or 3 in my opinion. Are they the best? I would have to do like some major film study because I know that there's like stats you can look at. Like I can go to PFF right now and just look like targets and completions and all that type of stuff. But for me, like I'm a film guy. I'm always going to be a film guy. So like I want to watch the film and determine that more effectively, in my opinion, right? So they're in the conversation, though, no doubt about it. And Benjamin Morrison, I think, is in the conversation for the best cornerback in college football in general. And Cam Hart's pretty dang good himself. All right. I think we had last question here. Yeah. Let's get the last question here. We had a question from Mackey family. So Coach Freeman said it was too late for them to substitute, but aren't you allowed to sub if the other team does? Ohio State replaced Henderson on that last play. I need to go back and look at that, Mackey. Like I don't know if that's the case. I'm going to believe you just for the simple fact that I don't know any better. But he is correct that it's illegal in the sense that, like, if there was no substitution, you can't just throw somebody out there, right? But again, I would have taken the substitution penalty. You would have lost it down. It would have just been half the distance to the goal, and you would have had 11 players on the field. So that would have been what I would have done. I understand why he didn't do it. I understand his process. But for me personally, I would have taken that penalty to get 11 guys on the field. I would have. So, yeah, just my 2 cents. All right, fellas, that's going to do it today for today's show. So, hey, if you missed any portion of this podcast, I talked a whole lot about the commits in this class. So Daniel Anderson committed over the weekend, as did CJ May, and Joseph Reif committed yesterday to the University of Notre Dame. Talked a lot about that in this first section. Second section, I recapped a whole lot of football players that were on campus this weekend, a whole lot of recruits. So if you missed either one of those sections, please go back and listen. Very much appreciate that. And before you leave, do not exit out yet. Hit that like button. Seriously, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the podcast. If you hit that little notification bell at the bottom of the screen on YouTube, means you'll get notifications for every show that we have coming up here at irishbreakdown.com. You can also go to boards.irishbreakdown.com. If for any and all of your latest intel is a premium message board that is very inexpensive and you get a lot of good stuff. I hope that you all got a lot out of I hope you got a lot out of the intel piece that I put up as far as like how things went this weekend with some of the recruits. Upon further review is tonight for everybody asking, 8:00 Eastern time on this YouTube channel as well. Brian Driscoll and Vince Dario will be breaking it down. Make sure also, if you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, 5-star reviews are very much appreciated. But make sure, just check out the website, irishbreakdown.com. It doesn't cost anything. It's free. But I'll talk to you again next time, folks. Again, this is Notre Dame Recruiting Hour here on the Irish Breakdown Podcast. We'll be back again very, very soon.